The invitation arrived in ivory cardstock with gold embossing, elegant and expensive. A deliberate reminder of everything Stephen Mahler wanted Helen to believe she'd lost. What he didn't know was that Helen Coleman had already won a prize far greater than his petty vindication. 5 reasons to smile, each with 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The September morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of Helen Coleman's townhouse in Columbia, Maryland, casting golden rectangles across the chaos that had become her beautiful, exhausting life. 2-year-old Nora was attempting to feed Cheerios to her twin brother Noah, who was more interested in building a tower with his plastic blocks. Chloe had somehow managed to get yogurt in her hair, again, while Jasmine sat in her high chair, conducting an imaginary orchestra with a rubber spoon. Liam, the quiet observer of the quintuplet crew, was methodically arranging his toy cars in a perfect line, oblivious to the pandemonium around him. "Mama, Noah won't eat," Nora announced with the dramatic flair of a seasoned tattletale. Helen stood at the counter, her scrubs already on for her afternoon shift at Howard County General Hospital, trying to gulp down her 3rd cup of coffee while simultaneously signing permission slips for her niece's school fundraiser. Her mother, Dorothy, was loading the dishwasher with the efficiency of a woman who'd raised 4 children of her own and now found herself in the trenches of grandmother duty. "Noah, baby, you need to eat something besides air," Helen called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of exhausted authority that only mothers of multiples truly master. It was Saturday, September 20th, 2025, and Helen had exactly 4 hours before her shift started. 4 hours to wrangle 5 toddlers through breakfast, get them dressed, and drop them off at her parents' house. 4 hours that would inevitably feel like 4 minutes because time, she'd discovered, moved differently when you were a single mother of quintuplets. The mail had come early. Helen could see it through the window. Her neighbor, Mr. Patterson, was already retrieving his letters from the communal mailbox area. She made a mental note to check it later, after she'd prevented Chloe from painting the walls with yogurt and convinced Jasmine that spoons were not, in fact, musical instruments. "Helen, honey, you got a fancy-looking envelope yesterday," Dorothy said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Left it on the counter by the fruit bowl. Looks expensive." Helen's attention was pulled away by Noah's sudden decision to overturn his bowl of Cheerios onto the floor. "Of course he did," she muttered, grabbing paper towels. "Nora, sweetie, can you not step in that?" "Thank you, baby." It took another 20 minutes of controlled chaos before Helen finally made it to the counter where her mother had left the mail. The envelope was indeed fancy, thick ivory cardstock with gold embossing. Her name and address were written in elegant calligraphy that probably cost more than her monthly grocery bill. She turned it over, noting the return address: Frederick, Maryland. Her stomach did a small flip. She knew exactly one person who still lived in Frederick and would send her something this ostentatious. "You've got to be kidding me," Helen muttered, sliding her finger under the seal. The invitation was even more elaborate than the envelope. Gold script on cream paper announced, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Mahler. A baby shower in honor of Brittany and Stephen Mahler. Saturday, October 4th, 2025, 2 p.m. The Mahler Estate, Frederick, Maryland." Helen stared at it for a long moment, her coffee forgotten. The audacity of it settled over her like a heavy blanket. Stephen was inviting her, his ex-wife, the woman he'd divorced because she supposedly couldn't give him children, to his baby shower. "What is it, honey?" Dorothy asked, coming up behind her. Helen handed her the invitation without a word. Dorothy's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline as she read, "Well, that's certainly something." "That's one word for it," Helen said drily. "Cruel would be another. Petty. Vindictive. Should I continue? What are you going to do?" Helen looked back at her children. Nora had finally succeeded in getting Noah to eat, though his face was now covered in mashed banana. Chloe was attempting to climb out of her high chair with the determination of a tiny escape artist. Jasmine and Liam were engaged in some sort of wordless communication that only twins seemed capable of. passing a stuffed elephant back and forth between them. These were her miracles. Her 5 impossible, wonderful, exhausting miracles. When Dr. James Chen had told her she was carrying quintuplets back in December 2022, she'd thought he was joking. When she'd given birth to them on that sweltering July day in 2023, holding each tiny baby for the first time, she'd felt a completeness she'd never experienced in her 3-year marriage to Stephen. "I'm going to go," Helen said suddenly. Dorothy's head snapped up. "What?" "I'm going to go to the baby shower." Helen felt a smile tugging at her lips, the kind of smile that wasn't entirely kind but was definitely satisfying. "And I'm bringing my babies with me." "Helen." "No, Mama, listen." Helen set down the invitation and turned to face her mother fully. "Stephen divorced me because he thought I couldn't give him children. His mother," she practically spat the word, "called me barren. They made me feel like I was defective, like I was less of a woman because I had PCOS. They humiliated me." Dorothy's expression softened with understanding and a hint of the righteous anger she'd carried since Helen's divorce. "I know, baby. I know what they did to you. Stephen sent me this invitation because he wants to rub his new life in my face. He wants me to show up alone, childless, probably gained a few pounds, looking miserable. He wants to parade Brittany and her perfect pregnancy in front of me like some kind of trophy." Helen's voice was steady now, her decision made. "But that's not who I am anymore. I'm not the woman he divorced. I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 5 beautiful, healthy children that I created on my own, without him, without his toxic mother, without any of them." "So you want to parade your children in front of him?" Dorothy asked, though there was a hint of approval in her voice. "Not parade. Just exist. Happily. Completely unbothered by his little power play." Helen picked up the invitation again. "Besides, I'm curious to see his face when he realizes that not only did I have children, I had 5 of them at once. If we're keeping score, I'm pretty sure quintuplets beat 1 singleton baby." Dorothy laughed, the sound rich and warm. "You know what? I think I like this plan. And I'm coming with you." "Mama, you don't have to." "Oh, I absolutely do. You think I'm going to miss seeing Patricia Mahler's face when you walk in with 5 grandchildren she'll never get to know? I've been waiting for this moment since the day that woman called my daughter barren." Over the next 2 weeks, Helen found herself thinking about the baby shower more than she'd like to admit. Part of her, the mature, evolved part, knew that going was petty. Knew that the healthiest thing would be to throw the invitation away and continue living her best life without giving Stephen Mahler another thought. But there was another part of her, the part that had cried herself to sleep during her marriage, the part that had felt broken and inadequate, the part that had endured Patricia's pointed comments about family legacy and healthy heirs. That part wanted to walk into that baby shower with her head high and her children by her side. It wasn't about revenge, she told herself. It was about closure. About showing herself as much as Stephen that she'd not only survived but thrived. On a rainy Wednesday evening, September 24, 2025, Helen was giving the quintuplets their bath, a nightly exercise in controlled flooding, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her best friend Keisha's name. "I need your hands," Helen answered instead of hello. Phone wedged between her shoulder and ear as she tried to prevent Chloe from drinking the bathwater. "Girl, when do you not need hands?" Keisha's laugh came through the speaker. "I'm calling because I heard through the grapevine, and by grapevine I mean Jennifer from church who knows everyone's business, that Stephen invited you to his baby shower. News travels fast. In Frederick. Please. I'm surprised carrier pigeons didn't deliver the gossip." Keisha paused. "Please tell me you're not actually going." "I'm going. Helen. And I'm bringing the babies." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Okay, I'm coming over. We need to discuss this face to face because I must have heard you wrong. I thought you said you're taking 5 toddlers to your ex-husband's baby shower like some kind of magnificent, slightly unhinged revenge scheme." "That's exactly what I said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Get the wine ready." By the time Keisha arrived, Helen had successfully bathed all 5 children, only minor flooding this time, and gotten them into pajamas. They were scattered around the living room in various states of winding down. Nora and Noah were playing with building blocks, Chloe was reading a book upside down, and Jasmine and Liam were curled up on the couch watching Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Keisha walked in carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an expression that was equal parts concern and amusement. She'd been Helen's friend since their nursing school days at the University of Maryland back in 2012, and she'd witnessed the entire Stephen saga from beginning to bitter end. "All right," Keisha said, setting the wine on the counter and pulling Helen into the kitchen for privacy. "Explain to me what's going through your head, because from where I'm standing, this looks like you're about to do something spectacular and possibly ill-advised." Helen poured them each a glass and leaned against the counter. "He sent me that invitation because he wants to humiliate me, Kuish. He wants me to show up and feel bad about myself. But I don't feel bad about myself anymore. I have 5 incredible children. I have a career I love. I have a life that's full and meaningful. I know that. You know that. But does Stephen need to know that? Maybe he doesn't need to. But I need him to." Keisha studied her friend's face for a long moment. "This is about more than just showing up, isn't it? This is about that woman, Patricia, and everything she said to you." Helen felt her throat tighten. Even after 4 years, the memory of Patricia's words still stung. Barren. Defective. Inadequate. She made me feel like I was worthless because I had PCOS. Like my value as a person, as a wife, as a woman, was tied entirely to my ability to reproduce on command. And now you want to show her that she was wrong. "I want to show myself that she was wrong," Helen corrected. "I spent so many nights during my marriage wondering if she was right. Wondering if something was broken in me. Even after I got pregnant, even after I had the babies, there was still this tiny voice in the back of my head asking if I was enough." "Oh, honey." Keisha reached across and squeezed Helen's hand. "You're more than enough. You're extraordinary. You do the work of 3 parents every single day. I know that intellectually, but I think I need this emotionally. I need to walk into that house, the house I used to live in, and show him that I'm happy, that I made it, that his rejection of me was actually the best thing that ever happened because it led me here, to these 5 incredible humans who depend on me and love me unconditionally." Keisha sipped her wine thoughtfully. "Okay. I get it. And you know what? I'm coming with you." "What?" "No, you don't have to. Girl, please. You think I'm going to miss this? Besides, you can't wrangle 5 toddlers at a baby shower by yourself. Your mama can't do it alone either. Bless her heart. You need backup, and I'm volunteering." Helen felt tears pricking her eyes. "You're the best, you know that?" "I'm aware." Keisha grinned. "Now let's talk strategy. What are you wearing? Because you need to look absolutely devastating. Not in a trying too hard way, but in that effortless I'm thriving and glowing and you lost all of this way." They spent the next hour planning like generals preparing for battle. Keisha insisted on taking Helen shopping for a new outfit. Dorothy would handle getting the quintuplets dressed in coordinating outfits. "We need them to look like a perfectly orchestrated unit," she declared when Helen called to update her on the plan. "What do you think he's going to do when he sees you?" Keisha asked as they were finishing their second glass of wine. Helen considered the question. She pictured Stephen's face, that handsome face that had once made her heart skip. She imagined his shock, his confusion, maybe even his regret. But more than that, she imagined her own face. Calm, confident, complete. "I think he's going to realize he made a terrible mistake," Helen said quietly. "Not because I'm there to win him back or because I want him to hurt, but because he's going to see that I became everything I was meant to be without him. And that the life he thought I couldn't have, I'm living it. Times 5. From the living room came a sudden crash followed by Noah's crying. Helen and Keisha rushed in to find that the block tower had collapsed, scattering plastic pieces across the floor. "It's okay, baby." Helen scooped Noah up, holding him against her chest as he sobbed. "We can build it again. It's always more fun the second time anyway." As she comforted her son, Helen caught Keisha watching her with a knowing smile. "What?" Helen asked. You're going to walk into that baby shower, and you're going to blow their minds, Keisha said. Not because you're trying to, but because you already have everything they're just beginning to understand. You've already lived through the sleepless nights, the impossible love, the fierce protection. You're already a warrior, Helen. They're just starting boot camp. October 4th, 2025, dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect autumn Saturdays that made Maryland beautiful. Helen woke at 6 a.m., not because of an alarm but because her body was trained to wake before the quintuplets started their morning chorus of needs. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, her stomach tight with anticipation. Today was the day. In 8 hours, she would walk back into the life she'd left behind, but this time as a completely different person. The babies woke gradually, as they always did. First Liam, then Nora, then the rest in quick succession. By 7:30 a.m., Dorothy had arrived to help with breakfast, and by 9 a.m., Keisha showed up with coffee and moral support. You ready for this? Keisha asked, watching as Helen tried to corral Chloe into her dress. I'm ready, Helen said, though her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned up the tiny garment. By 1 p.m., all 5 children were dressed in coordinating outfits. The girls in powder blue dresses and the boys in white shirts with navy bow ties. Helen wore a magenta jumpsuit that Keisha had insisted made her look like a confident goddess who has her life together. And her natural hair was styled in elegant braids that framed her face. Dorothy wore an emerald green dress that complemented Helen's outfit, and Keisha had chosen a teal number that completed their color-coordinated team. They looked, Helen thought, like they were going to a wedding rather than a baby shower, which felt appropriate, given that this was a kind of ceremony, a ritual of closure and new beginnings. Everyone ready? Dorothy asked, gathering diaper bags and sippy cups with military precision. As ready as we'll ever be, Helen said, taking a deep breath. They loaded the quintuplets into Helen's extended SUV, a vehicle she'd purchased specifically to accommodate her brood, and began the 45-minute drive to Frederick. With each mile, Helen felt her resolve strengthening. This wasn't about Stephen. This wasn't even about Patricia. This was about Helen, about the journey she'd taken from broken to whole, from lost to found. As they pulled up to the Mahler estate, the sprawling property that had once been partially hers, Helen felt a strange sense of disconnect. This place had been her home for 3 years, and now it felt like a foreign country, beautiful but no longer hers. The driveway was lined with expensive cars. Blue and white balloons created an elaborate arch over the entrance. A banner reading Baby Boy Mahler hung prominently on the front porch. It's a boy, Keisha observed. Patricia must be over the moon. The precious Mahler heir. Good for them, Helen said, and she meant it. She held no ill will toward the baby. It wasn't the child's fault that his father was a coward and his grandmother was toxic. They got out of the car, and Helen began the complex operation of extracting 5 toddlers from their car seats. Nora and Noah walked, holding Dorothy's hands. Helen carried Chloe on one hip, while Keisha managed Jasmine and Liam. Deep breath, Keisha whispered. You've got this. Helen straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked toward the front door of the house that used to be hers, her children surrounding her like a small army of proof that she'd won the war Stephen didn't even know they'd been fighting. The door was open, guests filtering in and out. Helen stepped across the threshold, and everything inside her went quiet and calm. She was home. Not in this house, but in herself. And whatever happened next, she was ready. Should Helen have taken the high road and skipped the baby shower entirely, or was she right to show up and own her success? What would you do in her situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The first person to notice Helen wasn't Stephen or even Patricia. It was Cheryl Henderson, one of the women from the old neighborhood book club that Helen had briefly been part of during her marriage. Cheryl was standing near the entrance with a champagne flute, sparkling cider probably, given the baby shower theme, and her eyes went wide as dinner plates when she saw Helen walk through the door. Helen. Cheryl's voice carried that particular pitch of shock mixed with curiosity. Oh my God, Helen Coleman? The use of her maiden name was deliberate, Helen noted. In Frederick's social circles, everyone would have known about the divorce. The whispers would have been delicious. Poor Stephen, married to a barren woman. Thank God he got out when he did. Hi, Cheryl, Helen said warmly, as if they were old friends reuniting at a coffee shop rather than at her ex-husband's baby shower. It's good to see you. Cheryl's gaze dropped to the children, first to Chloe on Helen's hip, then to Nora and Noah flanking Dorothy, and finally to Jasmine and Liam in Keisha's arms. Helen watched the mental calculation happen in real time. 5 children, all roughly the same age, all looking remarkably similar to each other. Are all of these yours? Cheryl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. All mine, Helen confirmed with a smile that was genuine pride mixed with a tiny bit of satisfaction at Cheryl's obvious shock. Cheryl, meet Nora, Chloe, Jasmine, Noah, and Liam. Kids, can you say hi to Ms. Henderson? A chorus of shy highs and waves followed, except for Chloe, who buried her face in Helen's shoulder with sudden toddler shyness. But how? I mean, when Stephen said you couldn't. Cheryl trailed off, realizing too late that she was wading into incredibly rude territory. Turns out I could, Helen said simply. Just not with Stephen. The words hung in the air for a moment before Cheryl's face flushed red. I should go find my husband. It was good seeing you, Helen. As Cheryl scurried away, probably to spread the news faster than a California wildfire, Keisha leaned in and whispered. First blood drawn. You didn't even have to try. I wasn't trying to draw blood, Helen protested, though she couldn't suppress her smile. Honey, your mere existence here is drawing blood. Might as well enjoy it. They moved further into the house, and Helen was struck by how different it looked. When she'd lived here, the decor had been warm and welcoming. Earth tones, family photos, comfortable furniture. Now it looked like it had been staged by someone who'd watched too many HGTV shows. Everything was white and gray and pristine, with pops of navy blue that presumably matched the baby's nursery. The baby shower was set up in the large living room and extended onto the back patio. There had to be at least 60 people there, maybe more. Helen recognized some faces from her marriage days. Stephen's cousins, his business associates, some of the church members. And there, holding court near the elaborate dessert table, was Patricia Muller herself. Patricia looked exactly as Helen remembered. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, expensive clothing in muted tones, and an expression of permanent disapproval as if she just smelled something unpleasant. She was gesturing animatedly to a group of women, probably regaling them with stories about her brilliant son and his wonderful new wife. Is that the dragon? Keisha asked, following Helen's gaze. That's her, Dorothy confirmed, her voice tight. Helen's mother had her own history with Patricia. Specifically, the time Patricia had suggested that Helen's fertility issues might be genetic deficiencies from Dorothy's side of the family. She looks like she ironed her face every morning, Keisha observed. Not a smile line in sight. Before Helen could respond, she heard a voice that made her entire body tense. Helen? What are you doing here? She turned to find Stephen standing 3 feet away, and for a moment time seemed to slow down. He looked older than she remembered, not dramatically so, but there were new lines around his eyes, and his hairline had receded slightly. He was wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than Helen's entire outfit, and he held a bottle of beer loosely in one hand. But it was his face that caught her attention. The shock, the confusion, and then, as his eyes tracked to the children surrounding her, the dawning realization. Stephen, Helen said calmly. Thank you for the invitation. What? He seemed incapable of forming complete sentences. His eyes kept moving from one child to another, counting, recounting, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Noah chose that moment to tug on Dorothy's hand and announce loudly, Grandma, I need to potty. Okay, baby, let's find the bathroom, Dorothy said, leading him away with Nora trailing behind, curious as always about where her brother was going. Stephen watched them go, then looked back at Helen. Are all of those children yours? Yes, Stephen. All 5 of them. 5. He said it like the word was foreign. You have 5 children. Quintuplets, actually. Born July 18, 2023. Helen shifted Chloe to her other hip. Chloe, sensing tension in the room the way toddlers somehow always did, wrapped her arms tighter around Helen's neck. "But the doctor said you couldn't." Stephen's face was cycling through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, confusion, anger, and something that might have been regret. "The doctor said I had PCOS and that conceiving naturally would be difficult. Not impossible. And certainly not impossible with medical intervention." Helen's voice was even, almost clinical. "I did IVF. Got pregnant on my third transfer. The rest is history." "You did IVF," Stephen repeated slowly. "After we divorced." "Yes. But why didn't you? When we were married, why didn't you suggest?" Helen felt something hot and sharp flare in her chest. "Are you seriously asking me that question right now? Stephen, I begged you to do IVF. I begged you to go to counseling. I begged you to stand up to your mother when she called me barren at your family dinner. Do you remember what you did?" He had the decency to look away. "You filed for divorce," Helen continued, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "You decided that I wasn't worth the effort. That having a child was more important than having me. So yes, I did IVF after we divorced, because I realized I didn't need you to become a mother. I just needed to want it badly enough to do it on my own." "Helen, Stephen started, but whatever he was going to say was cut off by a shrill voice from across the room. "Stephen! Stephen, who are you talking to?" Patricia Mahler was making her way toward them, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a death march. She was followed by a younger woman, blonde, petite, very pregnant, who must have been Brittany. Helen braced herself. This was the moment she'd been both dreading and, if she was honest, anticipating. The moment Patricia realized that her barren former daughter-in-law had accomplished the one thing Patricia had valued above all else: producing heirs. "Mother, Stephen began, but Patricia had already reached them. "Helen." Patricia's voice could have frozen boiling water. "This is unexpected." "Patricia." Helen nodded politely. "Congratulations on becoming a grandmother. That must be very exciting for you." Patricia's eyes narrowed. She'd always been sharp, always able to detect when she was being mocked, even subtly. But before she could respond, her gaze landed on the children. On Jasmine and Liam in Keisha's arms. On Chloe clinging to Helen. "Who are these children?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to suspect the answer. "Mine," Helen said simply. "My quintuplets. Nora, Chloe, Jasmine, Noah, and Liam. They're 2 years old. Well, 26 months to be exact." The color drained from Patricia's face. Actually drained. Helen watched it happen in real time, watched the older woman's expression shift from superior to shocked to something that might have been panic. "Quintuplets," Patricia repeated weakly. 5 babies, 1 pregnancy. Keisha chimed in helpfully, clearly enjoying this. Miracle of modern medicine. Well, that and Helen's incredible strength. Do you know how hard it is to carry 5 babies? The woman's basically a superhero. Brittany, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward with a smile that seemed genuine. She was pretty in that generic way that made Helen think of sorority girls and Instagram influencers. Lots of highlighter, perfectly applied lashes, blonde hair in loose waves. "Hi, I'm Brittany," she said, extending her hand to Helen. "I'm Stephen's wife. Your children are absolutely beautiful." Helen shook her hand, surprised by the warmth in Brittany's voice. Whatever she'd expected from Stephen's new wife, smugness, pity, superiority, this wasn't it. Brittany seemed actually kind. "Thank you," Helen said. "And congratulations on your pregnancy. When are you due?" "November 12th. I'm 34 weeks now, so getting close." Brittany placed a hand on her belly, a gesture Helen remembered well from her own pregnancy. "A boy, if you couldn't tell from all the blue." "Boys are wonderful," Helen said, and meant it. "Exhausting but wonderful. Can I ask?" Brittany hesitated, glancing at Stephen and Patricia before continuing. "What's it like? Having multiples? I've always wondered how people manage." Before Helen could answer, Patricia recovered her composure with visible effort. Well, this is all very surprising. I'm sure Helen has her hands full, which is why we won't keep her. I'm sure she needs to get the children home for their naps. It was a dismissal, pure and simple. Patricia was trying to regain control of the situation, to remove Helen before she could cause any more disruption to the carefully orchestrated baby shower. But Helen had driven 45 minutes with 5 toddlers specifically to be here. She wasn't leaving just because Patricia wanted her gone. Actually, they just woke up from their naps before we came, Helen said sweetly. They're good for at least another 3 hours. We'd love to stay and celebrate with you all. Dorothy returned at that moment with Noah and Nora, her timing impeccable as always. She took in the scene, Stephen looking like he'd been hit with a 2x4, Patricia barely concealing her fury, and Brittany looking genuinely curious, and smiled. Patricia, Dorothy said with exaggerated politeness. How lovely to see you again. It's been, what, for years? You look exactly the same. It wasn't a compliment. Dorothy was implying that Patricia looked old, which she did. But Patricia was too flustered to mount her usual defense. Dorothy, I didn't realize you'd be joining us. Oh, wouldn't miss it for the world. Besides, Helen needs help with the quintuplets. 5 children require many hands. Dorothy's emphasis on the word 5 was deliberate. Quintuplets, Patricia said again, as if repetition would make the concept less impossible. She turned to Stephen. Did you know about this? No, Mother, I had no idea. You invited her without knowing she had children? The way Patricia said, children, made it sound like a disease. Helen felt her earlier calm beginning to crack, the protective mother bear in her stirring to life. Is there a problem with my children being here, Patricia? Helen asked, her voice dangerously soft. This is a baby shower after all. Celebration of children. I assumed mine would be welcome. Of course they're welcome, Brittany interjected quickly, shooting Patricia a look that Helen couldn't quite decipher. All children are welcome. In fact, I'd love to hear about your experience with multiples. I've been so nervous about just one baby. I can't imagine 5. Patricia looked like she wanted to say something cutting, but Brittany's genuine kindness had diffused the situation, or at least made it socially unacceptable for Patricia to kick Helen out without looking like a complete monster. We should get the children some snacks, Keisha suggested, reading the room. I saw a kids' table set up on the patio. Helen, why don't you stay here and catch up with everyone while we get the little settled? It was a strategic move. Keisha was giving Helen a chance to have an adult conversation without wrangling toddlers, but she was also removing the children from what was clearly becoming a tense situation. Thank you, Kuish. Helen handed Chloe over, watching as her friend and mother shepherded all 5 quintuplets toward the patio where, indeed, there was a small table with coloring supplies and kid-friendly snacks. Once the children were gone, the 4 adults stood in an awkward circle. Stephen kept staring at Helen like she was a ghost. Patricia looked like she was trying to calculate how this development affected her carefully constructed narrative. And Brittany looked between all of them with growing understanding. So, Brittany said finally, breaking the silence. Helen, Stephen mentioned you 2 were married before. I didn't realize you'd stayed in touch. We haven't, Helen said. The invitation was a surprise. Stephen insisted, Patricia said quickly, too quickly. He thought it would be a nice gesture. Closure, you know. Helen almost laughed. Closure. That's what they were calling it. Not a power play. Not an attempt to parade his new life in front of his supposedly childless ex-wife. Closure. It was definitely surprising, Helen agreed. But I appreciate the invitation. It's given me a chance to see how much has changed. How much I've changed. Stephen finally found his voice. You look good, Helen. Really good. Motherhood suits you. There was something in his tone, regret, maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. Helen felt a tiny pang of something that might have been old affection, but it was buried under 4 years of growth and healing and self-discovery. Thank you. It's been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life. Helen glanced toward the patio where she could see her children coloring, Keisha and Dorothy hovering protectively. Those 5 kids saved me in a way. They gave me purpose when I thought I'd lost everything. I never meant, Stephen started, but Helen held up a hand. Stephen, it's okay. Really. I'm not here to rehash the past or make you feel guilty. I'm here because you invited me, and because I wanted to prove something to myself. She took a breath. I wanted to walk back into this house and realize that I'm okay. Better than okay. I wanted to know that your rejection didn't break me. And? He asked quietly. And I know. Helen smiled, a real smile this time. I'm more than okay. I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy with my life. Patricia made a small noise that might have been skepticism. 5 children as a single mother? That can't be easy. It's not, Helen admitted. It's exhausting and chaotic, and sometimes I don't sleep for days because someone is teething or sick or just decided that 3 a.m. is the perfect time to practice their new words. But it's mine. They're mine. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Not even for, Patricia started, then stopped herself. Not even for marriage? Helen finished. No, Patricia. Not even for that. I learned something important after Stephen and I divorced. My worth isn't determined by whether I have a husband or not. It's determined by how I show up for the people who depend on me, how I treat others, how I move through the world. And by that measure, I think I'm doing pretty well. Brittany was staring at Helen with something that looked like admiration. That's really beautiful, she said softly. A loud crash from the patio made all 4 of them turn. Noah had apparently knocked over a pitcher of lemonade, and Keisha was laughing while trying to mop it up with napkins as Noah apologized profusely. I should go help, Helen said, relieved for the excuse to escape this conversation. Helen, wait, Stephen called after her. She turned back. I'm sorry, he said, and he sounded like he meant it. For everything. For not fighting harder. For not standing up to my mother. For making you feel like you weren't enough. Patricia's face went rigid, but she didn't interrupt. Helen considered his apology for a moment. 4 years ago, she would have wept to hear those words. She would have clung to them like a lifeline. But now, standing here as a mother of 5, as a woman who'd built a life from the ashes of their marriage, she found that his apology didn't change anything. It was too late, and more importantly, she didn't need it anymore. I appreciate that, Stephen. I do. But, honestly, I'm grateful things happened the way they did. If you'd stayed, if we'd tried IVF together, I might have spent my whole life wondering if I was enough for you, if our children were enough, if I was living up to your mother's standards. She glanced at Patricia. Now I know that I'm enough, all on my own, without needing anyone's approval. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Stephen and his mother standing there with the weight of what might have been. On the patio, Helen found controlled chaos. The lemonade had been cleaned up, but now Nora was crying because Chloe had colored on her picture, and Jasmine was trying to eat a crayon while Liam watched with his usual quiet observation. Having fun yet? Keisha asked as Helen approached. More than I expected, actually. Helen scooped up Jasmine and gently removed the crayon from her mouth. I think I just told off my ex-husband and his mother in the nicest way possible. That's my girl. Dorothy beamed with pride. Did you see Patricia's face? I thought she might actually combust. She definitely wasn't expecting this, Helen agreed, settling into a chair and pulling Jasmine onto her lap. From this vantage point, she could see into the living room where guests were beginning to notice her presence. The whispers had started. She could see heads turning, mouths moving, fingers pointing. Let them talk, Helen thought. Let them whisper about the ex-wife who showed up with 5 children. Let them speculate about how it happened, when it happened, why Stephen didn't know. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that she was here, whole and happy, surrounded by the greatest gifts life had ever given her. A woman approached their table. Someone Helen didn't recognize. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Excuse me, the woman said. I'm Margaret, Brittany's mother. I couldn't help but overhear. Did you say you have quintuplets? I did. Helen smiled. These are mine. Well, 5 of them anyway. Margaret's eyes went wide. Oh my goodness. And you're here alone? I mean, without help. I have my mother and my best friend. Helen gestured to Dorothy and Keisha. And honestly, this is pretty typical for us. 5 against 3. We're outnumbered, but we manage. I had 4 children, Margaret said, sitting down without invitation. And I thought that was chaos. I cannot imagine 5 at once. You must be extraordinary. It was such a simple compliment, but it hit Helen right in the chest. Extraordinary. Not defective, not barren, not inadequate. Extraordinary. I just do what needs to be done, Helen said softly. Same as any mother. No, Margaret said firmly. Not the same. Special. My daughter is terrified about having one baby, and here you are, juggling 5 toddlers at your ex-husband's baby shower like it's a casual Sunday. If that's not extraordinary, I don't know what is. They talked for a while, Margaret asking questions about the logistics of multiples. How did Helen manage bedtime? What about grocery shopping? Did they all have different personalities? Helen found herself relaxing, enjoying the genuine curiosity rather than the judgment she'd expected. Margaret was kind, the kind of person who saw challenges as adventures rather than obstacles. Can I give you my daughter's number? Margaret asked eventually. I think it would really help her to talk to someone who's been through early motherhood, especially someone as capable as you. Helen hesitated. Taking Brittany's number felt like maintaining a connection to Stephen's new life, and she wasn't sure she wanted that. But then she looked at Margaret's hopeful face and thought about Brittany's genuine kindness earlier. Sure, Helen said. I'd be happy to talk with her. As Margaret walked away with Helen's phone number saved in her phone, Keisha leaned over and whispered, Are you seriously going to be friends with your ex-husband's pregnant wife? Maybe not friends, Helen said. But I can be kind. She seems nice. And she's not responsible for what Stephen and Patricia did to me. You're a better person than me, Keisha muttered. I'd have accidentally spilled lemonade on Patricia's shoes by now. Dorothy laughed. I'm still considering it. The baby shower continued around them. Games were played. Guess the baby food flavor. Measure the pregnant belly with toilet paper, all the standard activities. Helen watched from the patio, amused by how seriously the guests took these games, how Patricia micromanaged every detail. Around 4 p.m., it was time for cake and presents. Everyone gathered in the living room, and Helen knew this was the moment she should probably leave. The main event was about to happen, and her presence would only create more drama. But as she started gathering the quintuplets things, Brittany appeared at her side. Stay, she said quietly. Please. I know this is weird, but I'd like you to stay. Helen looked at her, surprised. Why? Brittany glanced back toward the living room where Stephen and Patricia were arranging presents. Because everyone here is Stephen's family or Patricia's friends or our church people who look at me like I'm a broodmare producing the precious Muller heir. She said it without bitterness, but there was exhaustion in her voice. You're the only person here who might understand what it's really like. Helen felt an unexpected kinship with this woman. She remembered being in Brittany's position, young, pregnant, or trying to be, surrounded by Patricia's impossible expectations. Okay, Helen said. We'll stay for cake. They moved back into the living room, Helen's small army of children attracting attention wherever they went. People made way for her, some smiling at the toddlers, others whispering behind their hands. Patricia was standing near the elaborate 3-tiered cake, blue and white of course, with little baby shoes on top, and her face when she saw Helen coming back inside was priceless. I thought you'd left, Patricia said, not bothering to hide her displeasure. Brittany asked us to stay for cake, Helen replied pleasantly. The children do love cake. It was a checkmate move. Patricia couldn't very well throw out a pregnant woman's request without looking like a monster, especially not in front of 60 guests. The cake-cutting ceremony was elaborate. Stephen and Brittany posing with a knife, Patricia hovering like a stage mother, guests taking pictures. Helen watched it all with a strange sense of detachment. This had almost been her life. This could have been her standing there, pregnant with Stephen's child, Patricia micromanaging every moment. She shuddered at the thought. When it came time to open presents, Helen expected to feel uncomfortable. Watching other people celebrate what she'd been denied, or thought she'd been denied, should have hurt. But instead she felt nothing. Or rather, she felt complete. She had her own celebrations, her own joy, her own family. Halfway through the present opening, Liam tugged on Helen's sleeve. "Mama, tired." She looked down at her quietest child, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes. It was after 4:30 p.m. now, past their usual dinner time, and they'd been overstimulated for hours. "Okay, baby," Helen said, standing. "Let's head home." She gathered her crew, helping Dorothy and Keisha collect bags and children. As they made their way to the door, Brittany caught up with them. "Thank you for coming," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. "And thank you for staying. It meant more than you know." "Take care of yourself," Helen said. "And call me if you need anything. Really. Motherhood can be lonely, especially at first." Brittany's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "I will. Thank you." As they walked out to the car, Stephen appeared on the porch. "Helen, wait." She turned, one hand on the car door, Chloe already secured in her car seat. "I just wanted to say." Stephen looked down at his feet, then back up at her. "You were right. About everything. I was a coward. I let my mother control my life, control our marriage. And I lost you because of it." "You did," Helen agreed. There was no point in sugarcoating it. "Do you think—" He started, then stopped. "Do you think we could have made it work? If I'd been stronger?" Helen considered the question. Once upon a time she would have said yes. But now, looking at this man who'd given up on her when things got difficult, she knew the truth. "No," she said gently. "Because the problem wasn't just that you weren't strong enough then. The problem was that I needed you to be, and you couldn't be. I needed a partner who would fight for our marriage, for our dreams, even when it was hard. Even when his mother disapproved. And you couldn't give me that. And now it doesn't matter. Now I have a life that doesn't need you in it." She smiled to soften the words. "I'm not saying that to be cruel, Stephen. I'm saying it because it's true. I built something beautiful out of the rubble of our marriage, and I'm proud of that." She got into the car, and as they pulled away, she looked back once to see Stephen standing on the porch, watching them go. Patricia had come out to stand beside him, her face pinched with disapproval. "How do you feel?" Dorothy asked from the passenger seat as they merged onto the highway. Helen thought about it. How did she feel? Triumphant. Vindicated. Satisfied. "Free," she said finally. "I feel free." In the back, the quintuplets were already falling asleep, exhausted from their big adventure. Helen could see them in the rearview mirror, Nora's head tilted against Noah's, Chloe clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, Jasmine and Liam holding hands even in sleep. These were her victories. These 5 miracles who'd arrived when she'd least expected them but needed them most. These were the proof that she'd won, not because she'd shown up at Stephen's baby shower and shocked everyone, but because she'd survived and thrived despite everything. As the Maryland countryside rolled past, Helen allowed herself to feel all of it. The satisfaction of facing her past, the joy of her present, and the hope for her future. She'd walked into that baby shower as a statement, a declaration that she couldn't be broken. And she'd walked out knowing something even better, that she'd never been broken at all. She'd been rebuilding herself all along, one day, one decision, one small victory at a time. The days following the baby shower felt surreal, like Helen had stepped through a portal into an alternate dimension where her past and present collided in unexpected ways. On Monday, October 6, 2025, she was back at Howard County General Hospital, moving through her shift in the pediatric ward with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for over a decade. "Helen, you've got that glow," her coworker Ramona observed as they restocked supplies in the medication room. Ramona was a Puerto Rican woman in her 50s who'd worked at the hospital since before Helen started and had become something of a mentor. "What happened this weekend?" "You meet someone." Helen laughed. "Not quite. I went to my ex-husband's baby shower." Ramona dropped the box of gauze she was holding. You did what now? You heard me correctly. Girl, sit down and explain this to me because that makes absolutely no sense. Ramona pulled up 2 stools and gestured for Helen to sit. Your ex-husband, the one who divorced you because of the pose thing, invited you to his baby shower? He did. And I went. With all 5 of my children. Ramona's eyes went wide, then she started laughing. Deep, full-bellied laughter that echoed off the medication room walls. Oh my God. Oh my God. You showed up with the quintuplets? Helen Coleman, you are my hero. Please tell me you took pictures. Keisha took a few. Helen pulled out her phone and showed Ramona the photo Keisha had snapped on the patio. Helen surrounded by all 5 children, looking confident and happy in her magenta jumpsuit. You look absolutely radiant, Ramona said, zooming in on the photo. And these babies are gorgeous. What did your ex say when he saw them? He looked like someone had hit him with a brick. Helen couldn't help smiling at the memory. His mother nearly had a stroke. Patricia. The one who called you barren. That's the one. Ramona shook her head in amazement. Karma is real, honey. She is absolutely real, and she has your back. Their break was interrupted by the charge nurse calling them back to duty, but the conversation stayed with Helen throughout her shift. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to share the experience with someone who understood the full context, who knew what she'd been through. That evening, after picking up the quintuplets from her parents' house and getting them home, fed, bathed, and into pajamas, the nightly marathon that was her life, Helen's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello. Hi, Helen. This is Brittany. Brittany Mahler. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. My mom gave me your number. Helen sat down on the couch, suddenly exhausted. Hi, Brittany. Is everything okay? Oh yes, everything's fine. The baby's good, I'm good. There was a pause. I wanted to thank you again for coming on Saturday. And for being so kind to me. You don't have to thank me for that. I think I do. I know the situation is complicated. I know what Stephen told me about your marriage, about why it ended. And then to see you walk in with 5 children. Brittany's voice trailed off. I don't think Stephen was entirely honest with me about what happened between you 2. Helen felt a flicker of something. Not quite satisfaction, but a vindication of sorts. What did he tell you? That you couldn't have children. That it was a medical impossibility. That the divorce was mutual because you both wanted different things. Brittany sighed. But that's not what happened, is it? Helen debated how much to share. This was Stephen's new wife after all. But Brittany had been kind to her, and there was something in her voice, a vulnerability maybe, or a need to understand. I have PCOS, Helen explained. Polycystic ovary syndrome. It makes getting pregnant naturally very difficult but not impossible. When I was diagnosed, I wanted to try IVF. Stephen's mother convinced him that I was defective, that he should cut his losses and find someone who could give him children easily. So he divorced me. Brittany was quiet for a long moment. And then you did IVF on your own. I did. 3rd transfer took. Turned out to be quintuplets. Helen glanced into the living room where Nora and Noah were playing quietly with blocks while their siblings slept upstairs. Best decision I ever made. I can't imagine doing this alone, Brittany said softly. I'm married, I have Stephen's support, I have his mother helping with everything, and I'm still terrified. There it was again, that hint of something Helen recognized, the weight of Patricia's expectations. Can I give you some advice? Helen asked. From someone who's been where you are? Please. Don't let Patricia take over. I know she means well. Helen didn't actually know that, but it seemed diplomatic to say. But she has very specific ideas about how things should be done. And if you let her, she'll make decisions about your baby that should be yours to make. She'll undermine your confidence as a mother. She'll make you feel like you're never doing anything right. She already is, Brittany admitted. She's hired a baby nurse without asking me. She's decorated the nursery according to her taste, not mine. She keeps telling me I'm too young to know what I'm doing, that I need her guidance." Helen's heart clenched with recognition. "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" 26. "I was 25 when I married Stephen. Patricia treated me like I was a child playing house. It never got better, Brittany. It only got worse because I didn't set boundaries early enough." "But how do I set boundaries? She's my mother-in-law. She's Stephen's mother. I don't want to cause problems." "You cause more problems by letting resentment build," Helen said gently. "Trust me on this. Talk to Stephen. Tell him what you need. And if he won't listen, if he chooses his mother's feelings over yours, then you have a bigger problem than an overbearing mother-in-law." They talked for another 20 minutes, Brittany asking questions about labor, about those early days with a newborn, about how to manage exhaustion and doubt. Helen answered honestly, sharing both the challenges and the incredible joys. "Can I ask you something personal?" Brittany said finally. "Sure. Do you still love him? Stephen, I mean." Helen considered the question carefully. "I love who I thought he was. I love the man I married, the one who promised to be my partner through everything. But that man either never existed or he wasn't strong enough to stand up to his mother. The Stephen the first saw on Saturday? I don't know him anymore. And honestly, I don't want to." "That's fair," Brittany said quietly. "I'm starting to wonder if I know him either." "Brittany, I'm going to say something that might sound harsh, but I think you need to hear it. Figure out who Stephen really is before that baby comes. Because once you're in the trenches of new parenthood, it's too late to realize you're with someone who won't have your back." After they hung up, Helen sat in the quiet of her living room, listening to the sounds of her children. Noah's soft laughter, Nora's chattering as she narrated her block tower building. This was her life now. Messy, chaotic, exhausting, and absolutely perfect. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "You've created a monster. My social media is blowing up with people asking about you and the quintuplets. Apparently someone from the baby shower posted photos and now everyone wants to know your story." Helen groaned. The last thing she wanted was to become some kind of viral sensation. She texted back, "Please tell me you're joking. Wish I was. Check your Instagram. You've been tagged in like 50 photos." Helen opened Instagram for the first time in days. Her notifications were indeed exploding. Photos from the baby shower had been posted by multiple people, and in the background of many of them, she could see herself with the quintuplets. The comments ranged from supportive, "She looks amazing," to speculative, "Wait, his ex-wife has 5 kids," to downright nasty, "She clearly did this for attention." "Great," Helen muttered. "Just what I needed." The next few days brought an unexpected avalanche of attention. Someone had apparently connected the dots between Helen's appearance at the baby shower and the local news story about the quintuplets from 2 years ago. Suddenly, reporters were calling, mommy bloggers were reaching out, and one local television station even showed up at her parents' house trying to get an interview. On Thursday, October 9th, Helen got a call from her supervisor at the hospital. "Helen, we need to talk about the media attention you're getting," Dr. Lisa Martinez said, her tone professional but concerned. "We've had reporters calling the hospital asking about you." Helen's stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to become public." "I know you didn't. But we need to address it. The hospital's communications team wants to discuss how to handle this appropriately. Can you meet with them tomorrow?" The meeting on Friday was surreal. Helen sat in a conference room with Dr. Martinez, the hospital's communications director, and a lawyer, all of them discussing her public image like she was some kind of celebrity instead of a pediatric nurse who'd simply attended a baby shower. "The story is compelling," the communications director, a sharp woman named Angela, explained. "Ex-wife with fertility issues shows up at former husband's baby shower with quintuplets. It's the kind of narrative that captures public attention." "I don't want public attention," Helen protested. "I just want to do my job and raise my kids in peace." "Unfortunately, that may not be entirely possible at this point," the lawyer, Mr. Rothstein, said. Several media outlets are requesting interviews. If you don't control the narrative, someone else will. What does that mean? Angela leaned forward. It means we recommend you do one interview, something tasteful, maybe with the local news, and tell your story on your terms. Otherwise, people will speculate, and speculation can be damaging. Helen felt trapped. How had attending one baby shower turned into this media circus? Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. But Helen. Angela's expression softened. For what it's worth, your story is inspiring. You're a single mother working as a nurse, raising quintuplets, and from what I understand, you're doing an excellent job at both. That's newsworthy not because it's sensational, but because it's real. A lot of people could relate to your journey. That weekend, Helen discussed the situation with her parents and Keisha over coffee while the quintuplets played in her parents' backyard in Ellicott City. I think you should do the interview, Dorothy said, watching through the window as Nora tried to teach Noah how to do a cartwheel. Not for revenge or spite, but to tell your truth. You've been through so much, baby. Maybe sharing your story will help other women who are struggling with infertility or divorce or single motherhood. Mama's right, Keisha agreed. Plus, and I'm just being honest here, Stephen deserves to see that his actions have consequences. He thought he could divorce you, remarry, and pretend like you never existed. But you do exist. And your story matters. Helen's father, Robert, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Do what feels right to you, Helen. Don't do it for anyone else. Not for us, not for revenge, not even to help other women. Do it because you want to tell your story. Helen looked out at her children. Jasmine was making a flower crown out of dandelions. Liam was examining a ladybug with intense concentration. Chloe was dancing to music only she could hear. These 5 miracles had come from her pain, from her determination, from her refusal to let someone else define her worth. Maybe her story was worth telling. On Monday, October 13, 2025, Helen sat down with Jennifer Torres from MarTV Baltimore, a respected local journalist who'd built a career on human interest stories. They filmed the interview in Helen's living room, with the quintuplets playing quietly in the background under Dorothy's supervision. Thank you for sitting down with me, Helen, Jennifer began, her voice warm and professional. Your story has captured a lot of attention this past week. Can you tell us how this all started? Helen took a deep breath. It started with an invitation. My ex-husband invited me to his baby shower. That must have been surprising. It was. We'd been divorced for 4 years with no contact. I believe he invited me because he thought I'd show up alone, probably sad, and it would validate his decision to divorce me. Helen paused, choosing her words carefully. You see, I was diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, during our marriage. It made getting pregnant naturally very difficult. Instead of exploring options like IVF, my ex-husband chose to divorce me. And then you had quintuplets on your own. I did. After the divorce, I decided to pursue IVF independently. My 3rd transfer was successful, and I became pregnant with quintuplets. They were born on July 18, 2023. Helen smiled. Nora, Chloe, Jasmine, Noah, and Liam. They're the greatest blessing of my life. Jennifer leaned forward. So when you received that baby shower invitation, what went through your mind? Honestly, at first I was angry. It felt like he was trying to hurt me to show me what I'd lost. But then I realized I hadn't lost anything. I'd gained everything that mattered. Helen looked over at her children. So I decided to go, not to hurt him, but to prove to myself that I'd moved on. That I was happy. And were you? Happy? I am. My life isn't easy. Being a single mother of quintuplets while working full-time as a nurse is probably one of the most challenging things anyone can do. But it's also the most rewarding. Every day, I get to watch these 5 incredible humans grow and learn and become themselves. That's a gift I wouldn't trade for anything. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. Jennifer asking about the challenges of multiples, about Helen's support system, about her message to other women struggling with infertility. I want women to know that their worth isn't defined by their ability to have children, Helen said firmly. And if they want children but face fertility challenges, there are options. It's not easy and it's not cheap and it's scary as hell. But it's possible. I'm living proof. What would you say to your ex-husband if he's watching this? Helen considered the question. She could say something cutting, something designed to hurt. But that wasn't who she was anymore. I'd say thank you, she said finally. Thank you for showing me that I didn't need you to build the life I wanted. Thank you for letting me go so I could find myself. And I'd wish him well with his new family. I genuinely hope he's a better father and husband than he was to me. After the interview wrapped, Jennifer turned off the camera and smiled at Helen. That was beautiful. Really. You're going to inspire a lot of people. The interview aired 2 days later, on Wednesday, October 15, 2025. Helen watched it with her parents, Keisha, and the quintuplets, who were more interested in their chicken nuggets than in seeing mommy on TV. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. Text messages poured in from friends, former colleagues, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Most were supportive. Some were invasive, asking for details she hadn't shared. A few were nasty, calling her vindictive or attention-seeking. But the message that surprised her most came from an unknown number at 9:47 p.m. This is Brittany. I just watched your interview. You were right about everything. Thank you for being honest. I'm making some changes. Helen stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Good for you. Your baby needs you to be strong. Good luck. The next morning, Helen got a call from Stephen. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Hello. You went on TV. His voice was tight with anger. You told our private business to thousands of people. I told my story, Helen corrected. My experience. My truth. You made me look like a villain. Stephen, I didn't have to make you look like anything. Your actions speak for themselves. Helen kept her voice calm. You divorced me because I had a medical condition. You let your mother call me barren. You gave up on our marriage when things got difficult. Those are facts, not opinions. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing that mattered, Helen interrupted. You gave me a house and money and status, but you didn't give me partnership. You didn't give me support when I needed it most. So yes, I told my story. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should think about why. My mother is devastated. Brittany is upset. You've caused chaos in my family. That's not my responsibility, Stephen. Your family's chaos existed long before I went on TV. I just gave it a voice. Helen paused. Is there anything else? Because I have 5 children to put to bed. You're making a mistake, flaunting this in public. Goodbye, Stephen. Helen hung up, her hand shaking slightly but her resolve firm. Keisha, who'd been listening from the kitchen, came out with 2 glasses of wine. He's mad. He's embarrassed. There's a difference. Good. He should be embarrassed. Keisha handed Helen a glass. To telling your truth. They clinked glasses, and Helen felt something settle in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. Or simply the satisfaction of having taken control of her own narrative. Over the next few days, Helen's social media inbox filled with messages from women sharing their own fertility struggles, their own stories of divorce and rebuilding. Each message was a reminder that her story wasn't just her own. It was part of a larger tapestry of women who'd been told they weren't enough and had found ways to prove otherwise. One message in particular stood out, from a woman named Christina in Ohio. I was diagnosed with PCOS 3 years ago. My husband left me, said he didn't sign up for a broken wife. I've been afraid to try IVF alone, afraid I'm not strong enough. But watching your interview, seeing you with your 5 beautiful children, it gave me hope. Thank you for sharing your story. Helen responded, You're stronger than you know. Whatever you decide, make sure it's your choice, not anyone else's. You are not broken. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. That night, as Helen tucked the quintuplets into their beds, a process that took nearly an hour because someone always needed one more hug, one more glass of water, one more story. She reflected on the whirlwind of the past 2 weeks. She'd walked into that baby shower thinking it was about facing her past. But it had become something much bigger, a declaration of her present, a celebration of her journey, and an inspiration for others walking similar paths. "Mama." Nora called from her bed, her voice sleepy. "Yes, baby. Why were you on TV?" Helen sat on the edge of Nora's bed, smoothing her daughter's braids. "I was telling a story about how I became a mommy. About how much I wanted you and your brothers and sisters." "Did you tell them we're special?" "I did. Because you are. You're all so special, and I'm so lucky to be your mama." Nora smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Helen moved through the room, checking on each child. Chloe curled up with her stuffed bunny, Jasmine sprawled across her bed like a starfish, Noah clutching his favorite fire truck, Liam sleeping peacefully with his thumb in his mouth. These were her victories. Not the TV interview, not the vindication of showing up at Stephen's baby shower, not even the messages from strangers thanking her for her courage. Her victories were these 5 breathing, dreaming, growing humans who called her mama. Everything else was just noise. November arrived in Maryland with the kind of weather that couldn't decide if it wanted to be fall or winter. Cold mornings that warmed into pleasant afternoons, leaves clinging stubbornly to trees before surrendering to the inevitable. On Saturday, November 1st, 2025, Helen was in the middle of her usual weekend chaos. Laundry mountain threatening to consume the living room, grocery list growing longer by the minute, and 5 toddlers who discovered that couch cushions made excellent building materials. "Noah, baby, we don't jump from furniture," Helen called out for the 3rd time that morning, catching her son mid-leap from the coffee table. "Gravity is not your friend." "But Mama, I'm Superman." Noah protested, his face scrunched with disappointment. "Superman has a mother who worries about broken bones. Use your powers for good and help me fold these towels instead." Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She'd been getting so many calls and messages since the interview aired that she'd started letting most of them go to voicemail. But this one showed Brittany's name, and something made Helen answer. "Brittany. Is everything okay?" "Helen, Brittany's voice was thick with tears. "I'm sorry to call you. I know this isn't your problem, but I didn't know who else to talk to." Helen immediately shifted into nurse mode, her voice calm and focused. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "No, the baby's fine. I'm fine. Physically." Brittany took a shaky breath. "I had a fight with Patricia. A big one. And Stephen." Stephen took her side. Helen closed her eyes, a familiar ache of recognition settling in her chest. "What happened?" "She showed up at our house this morning with a baby nurse. Not the one we discussed, a different one, someone she hired without telling us. And when I said I didn't want a stranger living in our house, that I wanted to try taking care of my own baby first, she—" Brittany's voice broke. "She said I was being foolish. That I was too immature to know what I needed. That first-time mothers always think they can do it alone until they're drowning. And Stephen. He said maybe we should listen to her. That she raised him just fine, so she must know what she's talking about." Brittany laughed bitterly. "I told him that you warned me about this. That you said Patricia would try to take over and that he'd let her. He got so angry, Helen. He said you poisoned me against his mother." Helen sat down heavily on the couch, ignoring the chaos around her. "Brittany, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I need to be honest with you. It's not going to get better. Not unless Stephen decides his marriage is more important than his mother's approval. And from my experience, that's not a decision he knows how to make." "What did you do when this happened to you?" "I tried to make it work for 3 years. I bent, I compromised, I tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law. And it destroyed me piece by piece, until there was nothing left of who I used to be." Helen watched Nora trying to dress Chloe in a princess costume, both girls giggling. "The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner." "But you have children now. You made it work." "I have children because I left," Helen corrected gently. If I'd stayed with Stephen, I'd still be stuck in that house, trying to earn Patricia's approval while Stephen stood by and let her tear me down. I'd have never done IVF because she'd have convinced him it wasn't worth it. I'd have spent my life childless and miserable, convinced I was the problem. Brittany was quiet for a long moment. I'm 8 months pregnant. I can't just leave. I'm not telling you to leave. I'm telling you to decide what you can live with. Can you live with Patricia making decisions about your baby? Can you live with Stephen choosing her over you? Can you live with feeling like a guest in your own home, in your own life? Helen softened her voice. Only you can answer those questions. But answer them honestly, Brittany. Not with the version of Stephen you wish existed, but with the one who's actually standing in front of you. After they hung up, Helen felt the weight of the conversation settle over her like a heavy blanket. She'd meant every word she'd said, but there was no satisfaction in being right about Stephen. No joy in watching another woman walk the same painful path she'd walked. Mama sad. Liam appeared at her side, his small hand patting her knee with the solemnity of a tiny therapist. Just thinking, baby boy. Helen pulled him into her lap, breathing in his little kid smell of shampoo and goldfish crackers. But I'm okay. Mama always okay, Liam announced with the certainty of a 2-year-old who'd never known his mother to be anything else. If only that were true, Helen thought. But she'd learned to fake it until she made it, and apparently she'd faked it well enough that her children believed in her invincibility. That afternoon, Helen took the quintuplets to the park in Columbia, a massive undertaking that required the coordination skills of a military general and the patience of a saint. Dorothy had come along as backup, and together they managed to keep all 5 children relatively safe as they explored the playground. Helen was pushing Jasmine and Chloe on the swings when she noticed a woman watching her from a nearby bench. The woman was in her 40s, well-dressed, with an expression that was part curiosity, part recognition. After a moment, the woman approached. "Excuse me, are you Helen Coleman?" Helen's guard went up immediately. After the TV interview, she'd been recognized a few times in public, and while most interactions had been positive, there'd been a few uncomfortable ones. "I am," Helen said cautiously. "I'm Jennifer Wu. I'm a producer at the Story Project. It's a documentary series that profiles extraordinary people doing ordinary things extraordinarily well." Jennifer smiled. "I saw your interview on the local news, and I'd love to talk to you about featuring your story in our series." "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not really interested in more media attention," Helen said, still pushing the swings in rhythm. "I did that one interview to control my narrative, but I'm not looking to become some kind of public figure." "I understand. But what you're doing, raising quintuplets as a single mother while working as a nurse, it's remarkable. And your journey through infertility, divorce, and rebuilding your life. There are so many women who need to hear that story, Helen. Not as sensationalism, but as hope." Helen studied Jennifer's face, looking for signs of insincerity or exploitation. But the woman seemed genuine, her interest feeling more like respect than opportunism. "Can I think about it?" Helen asked finally. "Of course. Here's my card. Take all the time you need." Jennifer handed over a business card. "For what it's worth, I've been following stories like yours for 15 years. Yours is one of the most inspiring I've encountered. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. You're living proof that sometimes our biggest heartbreaks lead us to our greatest joys." After Jennifer left, Dorothy raised her eyebrows at Helen. "You thinking about doing it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to just go back to being anonymous. But another part." Helen watched Nora helping Noah climb the slide, her oldest daughter already showing signs of the caretaker she'd become. "Another part thinks maybe there's a reason this is all happening. Maybe my story is supposed to reach someone who needs it. Or maybe," Dorothy said wisely, "you're allowed to just live your life without turning it into a lesson for everyone else." Helen laughed. "When did you get so philosophical, Mama?" "When my daughter started making national news by simply existing." That evening, after the quintuplets were finally asleep, a process that had involved 3 bedtime story sessions, 2 bathroom trips, and 1 impromptu dance party that absolutely did not help with the sleeping situation, Helen sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and Jennifer Wu's business card. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "Did you see Patricia's Facebook post? Girl, she's trying to control the narrative." Helen opened Facebook, something she rarely did anymore, and navigated to Patricia Mahler's page. Sure enough, posted 3 hours ago. "In light of recent public attention on our family, I want to set the record straight. Stephen's first marriage ended amicably due to incompatible life goals. We hold no ill will toward Helen and wish her well. However, we ask for privacy as we prepare to welcome our grandson. Family matters should remain private, and we hope everyone can respect that boundary. #family first #privacy matters." The post had dozens of comments, mostly from Patricia's church friends and social circle, all offering support and agreement that family business should stay private. Helen felt a flare of anger, then something else, amusement. Patricia was trying to rewrite history, to paint the divorce as mutual and amicable when it had been anything but. She was trying to be the victim of unwanted attention while simultaneously using that attention to control how people perceived her. Helen's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She could respond. She could correct the record, point out the hypocrisy, defend herself against Patricia's subtle implications. But as she sat there, tea growing cold, she realized something important. She didn't need to. Patricia's version of events didn't change Helen's truth. It didn't erase the years of therapy Helen had needed after the divorce. It didn't invalidate her feelings or her experience. Patricia could post whatever she wanted on Facebook. It didn't touch the life Helen had built for herself and her children. Instead of responding, Helen simply blocked Patricia's profile and closed the app. "Not worth it," she muttered to herself, taking her tea to the sink. As she was washing her cup, her phone rang. Unknown number again. Helen answered, half expecting another reporter or producer. "Helen Coleman speaking. This is attorney Rebecca Walsh from Walsh & Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Stephen Mahler. He'd like to formally request that you cease all public discussion of your marriage and divorce. He's prepared to pursue legal action if necessary." Helen felt her heart rate spike, but she kept her voice steady. "Legal action for what exactly?" "For defamation and invasion of privacy. Your public statements have caused Mr. Mahler considerable distress and have damaged his reputation in the community. I told the truth about my own experience. That's not defamation. Mr. Mahler disagrees. He's willing to forego legal action if you agree to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding your marriage, the divorce, and any interactions with the Mahler family." Helen laughed. She couldn't help it. "He wants me to sign an NDA? After 4 years of divorce? Because I went on TV and told my own story. Mr. Mahler is prepared to compensate you for your cooperation. Tell Mr. Mahler that if he wants to sue me for telling the truth about my own life, he's welcome to try. But he should know that I kept every text message, every email, every piece of documentation from our marriage and divorce, including the ones where his mother called me defective. So if he wants to make this public in a courtroom, I'm more than happy to oblige." Helen's voice was cold now, all traces of amusement gone. "And you can also tell him that I'm done being intimidated by him and his family. I've moved on, built a beautiful life, and I'm not going back into silence because it makes him uncomfortable. Ms. Coleman." "Good night, Ms. Walsh." Helen hung up, her hands shaking. She immediately called Keisha, who answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you're calling with good news because I just saw Patricia's Facebook post and I'm ready to drive to Frederick and start some shit. Stephen's threatening to sue me." "What?" Helen explained the lawyer's call, and with each word, she could practically hear Keisha's blood pressure rising. That pathetic, cowardly mama's boy piece of Keisha launched into a creative string of expletives. "He can't sue you for telling your own story." That's what I told his lawyer. But Kuish, what if he actually tries? What if this becomes a whole legal thing? I can't afford a court battle. I have 5 kids to support. First of all, breathe. Second, he's bluffing. This is an intimidation tactic because you made him look bad, which, by the way, he did to himself. Third, if he does try to sue, Every women's rights organization in the country will line up to defend you. You're not alone in this, Helen." After they hung up, Helen sat in her quiet kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Upstairs, one of the quintuplets cried out in their sleep. Chloe, probably, who sometimes had bad dreams. Helen went up to check, finding her daughter tangled in her blankets, whimpering softly. "Shoo, baby girl, Mama's here." Helen untangled the blankets and lifted Chloe into her arms, settling into the rocking chair in the corner of the room. Chloe immediately relaxed, her little body going soft and trusting against Helen's chest. This, Helen thought, was what mattered. Not Patricia's Facebook posts or Stephen's legal threats or media attention. This quiet moment in the dark, holding her daughter, being the safe place where a scared child could find comfort. Everything else was just noise. On Monday, November 3rd, Helen was back at work when her supervisor, Dr. Martinez, called her into her office. "Please tell me this isn't about more media attention," Helen said as she sat down. "When my daughter started making national news by simply existing." That evening, after the quintuplets were finally asleep, a process that had involved 3 bedtime story sessions, 2 bathroom trips, and 1 impromptu dance party that absolutely did not help with the sleeping situation, Helen sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and Jennifer Wu's business card. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "Did you see Patricia's Facebook post? Girl, she's trying to control the narrative." Helen opened Facebook, something she rarely did anymore, and navigated to Patricia Mahler's page. Sure enough, posted 3 hours ago. "In light of recent public attention on our family, I want to set the record straight. Stephen's first marriage ended amicably due to incompatible life goals. We hold no ill will toward Helen and wish her well. However, we ask for privacy as we prepare to welcome our grandson. Family matters should remain private, and we hope everyone can respect that boundary. #family first #privacy matters." The post had dozens of comments, mostly from Patricia's church friends and social circle, all offering support and agreement that family business should stay private. Helen felt a flare of anger, then something else, amusement. Patricia was trying to rewrite history, to paint the divorce as mutual and amicable when it had been anything but. She was trying to be the victim of unwanted attention while simultaneously using that attention to control how people perceived her. Helen's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She could respond. She could correct the record, point out the hypocrisy, defend herself against Patricia's subtle implications. But as she sat there, tea growing cold, she realized something important. She didn't need to. Patricia's version of events didn't change Helen's truth. It didn't erase the years of therapy Helen had needed after the divorce. It didn't invalidate her feelings or her experience. Patricia could post whatever she wanted on Facebook. It didn't touch the life Helen had built for herself and her children. Instead of responding, Helen simply blocked Patricia's profile and closed the app. "Not worth it," she muttered to herself, taking her tea to the sink. As she was washing her cup, her phone rang. Unknown number again. Helen answered, half expecting another reporter or producer. "Helen Coleman speaking. This is attorney Rebecca Walsh from Walsh & Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Stephen Mahler. He'd like to formally request that you cease all public discussion of your marriage and divorce. He's prepared to pursue legal action if necessary." Helen felt her heart rate spike, but she kept her voice steady. "Legal action for what exactly?" "For defamation and invasion of privacy. Your public statements have caused Mr. Mahler considerable distress and have damaged his reputation in the community. I told the truth about my own experience. That's not defamation. Mr. Mahler disagrees. He's willing to forego legal action if you agree to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding your marriage, the divorce, and any interactions with the Mahler family." Helen laughed. She couldn't help it. "He wants me to sign an NDA? After 4 years of divorce? Because I went on TV and told my own story. Mr. Mahler is prepared to compensate you for your cooperation. Tell Mr. Mahler that if he wants to sue me for telling the truth about my own life, he's welcome to try. But he should know that I kept every text message, every email, every piece of documentation from our marriage and divorce, including the ones where his mother called me defective. So if he wants to make this public in a courtroom, I'm more than happy to oblige." Helen's voice was cold now, all traces of amusement gone. "And you can also tell him that I'm done being intimidated by him and his family. I've moved on, built a beautiful life, and I'm not going back into silence because it makes him uncomfortable." "Ms. Coleman." "Good night, Ms. Walsh." Helen hung up, her hands shaking. She immediately called Keisha, who answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you're calling with good news because I just saw Patricia's Facebook post and I'm ready to drive to Frederick and start some shit. Steven's threatening to sue me." "What?" Helen explained the lawyer's call, and with each word, she could practically hear Keisha's blood pressure rising. That pathetic, cowardly mama's boy piece of... Keisha launched into a creative string of expletives. "He can't sue you for telling your own story." "That's what I told his lawyer." "But Kuish, what if he actually tries? What if this becomes a whole legal thing? I can't afford a court battle. I have 5 kids to support. First of all, breathe. Second, he's bluffing. This is an intimidation tactic because you made him look bad, which, by the way, he did to himself. Third, if he does try to sue, every women's rights organization in the country will line up to defend you. You're not alone in this, Helen." After they hung up, Helen sat in her quiet kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Upstairs, one of the quintuplets cried out in their sleep. Chloe, probably, who sometimes had bad dreams. Helen went up to check, finding her daughter tangled in her blankets, whimpering softly. "Shoo, baby girl, Mama's here." Helen untangled the blankets and lifted Chloe into her arms, settling into the rocking chair in the corner of the room. Chloe immediately relaxed, her little body going soft and trusting against Helen's chest. This, Helen thought, was what mattered. Not Patricia's Facebook posts or Steven's legal threats or media attention. This quiet moment in the dark, holding her daughter, being the safe place where a scared child could find comfort. Everything else was just noise. On Monday, November 3rd, Helen was back at work when her supervisor, Dr. Martinez, called her into her office. "Please tell me this isn't about more media attention," Helen said as she sat down. "Not exactly." Dr. Martinez handed her a printed email. "This came to the hospital administration this morning. It's a formal complaint from Patricia Muller claiming that you've been harassing her daughter-in-law and interfering with her son's marriage." Helen read the email, her jaw tightening with each sentence. Patricia claimed that Helen had inserted herself into Stephen and Brittany's life, that she'd been calling Brittany and poisoning her against the Muller family, and that she'd used her position as a healthcare worker to manipulate a vulnerable pregnant woman. "This is insane," Helen said when she finished reading. "Brittany called me. Multiple times. I didn't seek her out. I was trying to help her because she had questions about motherhood and because Patricia is doing to her exactly what she did to me." "I believe you," Dr. Martinez said. "But we have to take complaints seriously, especially ones that involve allegations of using your professional position inappropriately. I never identified myself as a nurse when talking to Brittany. I was speaking to her as someone who'd been through a similar situation, not as a healthcare provider." "I know. And I've already responded to Mrs. Muller explaining that your conversations with Brittany occurred outside of your professional capacity and don't constitute any violation of hospital policy." Dr. Martinez leaned back in her chair. "But Helen, I need you to understand something. You've become visible. And visibility comes with consequences. There are people who don't like your story, who feel threatened by it, or who want to silence you. Patricia Muller is one of those people. So what do I do? You document everything. Every call, every text, every interaction. You protect yourself legally and professionally. And you decide whether continuing to engage with this family is worth the cost." Helen spent her lunch break in her car, crying. Not because she was afraid or regretful, but because she was exhausted. Exhausted from fighting, from defending herself, from constantly having to prove that she deserved to tell her own story. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brittany. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know Patricia was going to do this. She found out we'd been talking and completely lost it. I told her you were just helping me, but she said you were trying to destroy Stephen's marriage like you destroyed yours. I'm so sorry, Helen." Helen stared at the message for a long time before responding, "It's not your fault. But Brittany, you need to understand something. This is who they are. Patricia will always try to control everything, and Stephen will always let her. You have to decide if you can live with that, because it won't change." Brittany's response came quickly. "I'm due in 9 days. I can't make any big decisions right now." "I know. But when you're ready, trust yourself. You're stronger than they want you to believe." Helen didn't hear from Brittany again after that. She respected the silence. Brittany had her own journey to navigate, her own decisions to make. Helen couldn't rescue her from the Mahler family. She could only hope that Brittany would find the strength to rescue herself. On November 12, 2025, Brittany's due date, Helen found herself thinking about Stephen's new wife throughout the day. Was she in labor? Had the baby come? Was she okay? The answer came through social media that evening. Patricia had posted photos of a baby boy. "Welcoming our precious grandson, Christopher Stephen Mahler. 7 pounds 3 ounces of pure perfection. Mother and baby doing well. Hashtag proud grandma, hashtag blessed beyond measure." Helen studied the photos. There was one of Stephen holding the baby, looking terrified and awed. One of Brittany in the hospital bed, looking exhausted but smiling. And several of Patricia holding Christopher. Her expression one of pure triumph. "Congratulations," Helen whispered to her phone screen, and she meant it. Whatever complicated history existed between their families, that baby was innocent. He deserved to be welcomed into the world with joy, not overshadowed by adult drama. She sent Brittany a brief text, "Congratulations on your son. Wishing you all the best." Brittany responded hours later, "Thank you. It means a lot." That night, as Helen was putting the quintuplets to bed, Nora asked, "Mama, why do people get mad at you?" The question caught Helen off guard. "What do you mean, baby?" Grandma was talking to Grandpa. She said people are being mean to you because you told your story. Nora's face was serious, concerned in that way children get when they sense their parents are struggling. "Are you sad?" Helen pulled her daughter close. "Sometimes people get uncomfortable when you tell the truth, especially if that truth makes them look bad. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell it. You should always tell your truth, Nora, even when it's hard, even when people don't like it." "Is that brave?" "That's very brave." "Are you brave, Mama?" Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm trying to be, baby girl. Every day I'm trying." After all 5 children were asleep, Helen made herself a cup of tea and sat on her back porch, wrapped in a blanket against the November chill. The documentary producer's business card was still on her kitchen counter. The threat of Stephen's lawsuit hung over her head. Patricia's complaints to her hospital could potentially affect her career. But sitting there in the quiet, Helen realized something important. She wasn't afraid anymore. She'd survived the divorce. She'd survived the fertility treatments. She'd survived pregnancy with quintuplets and the terrifying early days of caring for 5 newborns simultaneously. She'd survived judgment, gossip, and the loss of the life she'd thought she wanted. She'd survived, and she'd thrived. Whatever Stephen and Patricia threw at her now, it couldn't touch the core of who she'd become. A mother, a healer, a survivor, a truth-teller. She pulled out her phone and sent an email to Jennifer Wu. "Let's talk about the documentary. I think I have more to say." The morning of November 20th, 2025, dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made Helen grateful for heated car seats and waterproof boots. She was getting the quintuplets ready for their appointment with Dr. Patricia Chen. No relation to Dr. James Chen, her IVF doctor, though Helen always had to clarify that, for their annual checkup. Getting 5 2-year-olds to the pediatrician required the organizational skills of a NASA mission director. "Nora, shoes go on feet, not on your brother's head," Helen called out, simultaneously trying to zip Jasmine's jacket and prevent Liam from eating a crayon he'd found under the couch. Dorothy appeared at the door like a superhero responding to a distress signal. "I'm here. What do you need?" Hands, sanity, and possibly a miracle. Between the two of them, they managed to get all 5 children dressed, fed, and loaded into Helen's SUV by 9:15 a.m. for their 10 a.m. appointment. Traffic on Route 29 was its usual nightmare, but they pulled into the pediatrician's office with 10 minutes to spare, a personal record. The waiting room went quiet when they walked in, the way it always did. 5 toddlers who looked remarkably similar tended to have that effect. The receptionist, Maria, who'd been checking them in for 2 years now, grinned. The Coleman crew. Right on time as always. Dr. Chen will be so proud. Maria handed Helen a clipboard. Just update any changes to their information, and we'll get you all back there. While Helen filled out paperwork, Dorothy supervised the quintuplets at the play area. Noah was building with blocks, Nora was reading to Chloe from a board book, and Jasmine and Liam were engaged in their usual twin telepathy, playing some game only they understood. Helen Coleman. A nurse appeared at the door. We're ready for you. The checkup itself was controlled chaos as always. Dr. Chen was a patient woman in her 50s who genuinely seemed to enjoy the challenge of examining quintuplets. She'd been their pediatrician since birth and had seen them through countless ear infections, teething struggles, and developmental milestones. Everyone's looking great, Dr. Chen announced after examining all 5 children. Weights are good, heights are on track, development is age-appropriate. Nora's vocabulary is exceptional. Has she always been this verbal? Since birth, Helen confirmed. She came out talking, I swear. And Liam. Still the quiet observer. Always. He watches everything, processes it all, but only speaks when he has something important to say. Dr. Chen made notes in her tablet. That's actually a sign of high intelligence. Some of the brightest kids are the quiet ones. She looked up at Helen. How are you holding up? I know it's a standard question, but with everything you've had going on lately, the media attention, the public interest in your story, I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself too. Helen felt unexpected emotion well up in her throat. It was such a simple question, but no one had really asked her that. Everyone wanted to know about the quintuplets, about the drama with Stephen, about how she managed. No one asked how she was actually doing. I'm tired, Helen admitted. Really, really tired. But I'm okay. The kids are happy and healthy, and that's what matters. The kids are thriving because you're their mother, Dr. Chen said firmly. But Helen, you can't pour from an empty cup. Are you getting any time for yourself? Any support beyond your parents? I have Keisha, and my parents are amazing. But you're right, I don't have much time for myself. Between work and the kids, there's not much left over. I'm going to say something that might sound strange coming from a pediatrician, but I'm saying it anyway. You need to prioritize yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in a sustainable way. Your children need you healthy and whole, not burned out and running on fumes. Dr. Chen's expression softened. I've been practicing for 27 years. I've seen what happens when single parents, especially single mothers, try to be everything to everyone. It's not sustainable, Helen. Something has to give. As they were leaving the office, Helen's phone rang. Jennifer Wu, the documentary producer. Helen, hi. Thanks for getting back to me about the documentary. I'd love to set up a time to meet and discuss what this would look like. Are you free this week? They scheduled a meeting for Saturday, November 22nd, at a coffee shop in Columbia. Helen would bring the quintuplets. There was no such thing as without the kids in her life, and Jennifer promised to bring a colleague who specialized in family documentaries. Saturday arrived with the kind of cold, clear weather that made autumn in Maryland beautiful. Helen dressed the quintuplets in coordinating outfits. Not matching, because she'd learned that matching 5 toddlers made them look like a novelty act, but coordinated navy blues and creams that suggested they belonged together without being over the top. Jennifer Wu was waiting at a corner table with another woman, both of them standing when Helen arrived with her entourage. Helen, thank you so much for meeting with us. Jennifer gestured to her companion. This is Claire Morrison, our family documentary specialist. She's worked on several projects featuring single mothers and complex family dynamics. Claire was a black woman in her early 40s with natural hair styled in elegant locks and an immediately warm presence. She crouched down to the quintuplets level. Hi there. You all must be Nora, Chloe, Jasmine, Noah, and Liam. Your mama told me you were beautiful, but she didn't mention you were this beautiful. The children, predictably, responded with a mix of shy smiles and bold curiosity. Nora immediately launched into an explanation of who was who, pointing at each sibling and providing detailed descriptions of their favorite colors, foods, and activities. She's going to be a talk show host one day, Claire said with a laugh, standing back up. That child has charisma. They ordered coffee and hot chocolate, settling into a conversation about what the documentary would entail. Jennifer explained that it would be part of a series called Rebuilding, Stories of Resilience and Renewal, featuring people who'd faced significant life challenges and rebuilt their lives in meaningful ways. We'd want to film over several months, Jennifer explained. Not constantly. We're not talking about a reality show. More like checking in at significant moments. A typical day at home, a day at work if you're comfortable with that, maybe some conversations with your parents and friends. The goal is to show the reality of your life without sensationalizing it. What about Stephen? Helen asked. And his family? Would they be involved? Only if you wanted them to be, Claire interjected. This is your story, Helen. We'd probably want to address the divorce and the circumstances around it, but we don't need to interview Stephen or his mother. Your perspective and experience are what matter. Helen watched her children playing with the sugar packets, Noah building a tower while Nora supervised and Chloe inevitably knocked it down. This was her real life. The mess, the chaos, the constant negotiation of 5 different personalities and needs. If I do this, Helen said slowly, I need some conditions. First, my children's privacy is paramount. I don't want them exploited or turned into spectacles. Second, I maintain editorial control over how my story is told. And third, if at any point this becomes too disruptive to our lives, I can pull out. Jennifer and Claire exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. We can work with all of that, Jennifer said. In fact, those are exactly the boundaries we want our subjects to have. This isn't about exploitation. It's about authentic storytelling. They spent another hour discussing logistics, potential filming dates, and the overall arc of the documentary. By the time Helen left the coffee shop, she'd agreed to move forward with the project, with filming scheduled to begin in January 2026. On the drive home, with the quintuplets dozing in their car seats, Helen felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Was she doing the right thing? Was she opening her life up to more scrutiny and judgment? Or was she taking control of her narrative in a way that could help others? Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. Girl, I just got a call from a lawyer. Not Stephen's lawyer, a different one. Someone wants to talk to you about your rights regarding the interviews and media attention. Helen pulled into a parking lot and called Keisha back immediately. What are you talking about? What lawyer? Her name is Diane Portman. She's with some women's rights organization. I didn't catch the full name because I was at work and had to step out. But she said she saw your interview and heard about Stephen's threats to sue you, and her organization wants to offer you pro bono legal representation. Why would they do that? Because apparently your story has struck a nerve, Helen. You're not just one woman talking about her divorce anymore. You've become a symbol of women standing up to men who tried to silence them. Women fighting back against being defined by their fertility. Women refusing to be intimidated. Helen sat in her car, listening to the soft sounds of her children sleeping, and felt the weight of what Keisha was saying. She'd never wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to live her life, raise her children, and maybe show Stephen that he'd been wrong about her. But somewhere along the way, her personal story had become something bigger. Give me her number, Helen said. I'll call her on Monday. That evening, after the quintuplets were in bed, Helen did something she rarely allowed herself. She Googled her own name. The results were overwhelming. Articles about her interview had been picked up by national news outlets. Parenting blogs had written think pieces about her journey. Fertility forums were discussing her story in depth. Someone had even created a hashtag. Hashtag Helen Coleman Strong. But there were also negative articles. Opinion pieces calling her vindictive and attention-seeking. Social media posts accusing her of trying to destroy Stephen's new marriage. A particularly nasty blog post from someone claiming to be a traditional family advocate, who argued that Helen's choice to have children alone was selfish and that she was setting a bad example. The comments on that article made Helen's stomach turn. People who'd never met her, who knew nothing about her life beyond what they'd read online, were making judgments about her mothering, her choices, her worth as a person. She closed her laptop and sat in the dark of her living room, fighting the urge to cry. This was the cost of visibility, she realized. The trade-off for telling her story was that everyone felt entitled to have an opinion about it. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but at this point, what did it matter? Hello. Helen. This is Dr. James Chen. Helen sat up straight, surprised. She hadn't spoken to her IVF doctor in over a year, not since the quintuplets' one-year check-in. Dr. Chen, hi. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I'm calling because I saw your interview, and I wanted to reach out. Helen, what you're doing, sharing your story publicly, it's incredibly brave. I've had 3 new patients this month specifically mention your interview as the reason they finally decided to pursue IVF. You're giving people hope. Helen felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't know. You couldn't have known. But I wanted you to know now. I also wanted to tell you that if you face any legal challenges from your ex-husband or his family, I'm willing to testify on your behalf. I have all your medical records, documentation of your post-diagnosis, notes from our consultations. If anyone tries to claim you couldn't have children or that you've lied about your medical history, I can prove otherwise. Thank you, Helen whispered. That means more than you know. You took a chance on yourself when everyone told you it was impossible, Dr. Chen said. That took extraordinary courage. Don't let anyone diminish that, Helen. What you've accomplished is remarkable. After they hung up, Helen allowed herself to cry. Big, gulping sobs that she'd been holding back for weeks. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of release, of recognition, of finally understanding that her story mattered not just to her, but to countless women walking similar paths. On Monday, November 24th, Helen called Diane Portman, the lawyer Keisha had mentioned. Diane had a warm, confident voice and got straight to the point. Diane had a warm, confident voice and got straight to the point. Helen, I'm with the Women's Legal Defense Initiative. We provide pro bono legal services to women facing legal challenges related to divorce, custody, or retaliation for speaking out about their experiences. I saw your interview and heard about Stephen Mahler's threats to sue you for defamation. He hasn't actually filed anything, Helen said. His lawyer just called to threaten and try to get me to sign an NDA. That's a classic intimidation tactic. Has he contacted you since then? No, but his mother filed a complaint with my hospital claiming I was harassing his new wife. And what came of that? Nothing. My supervisor confirmed that I hadn't violated any policies. But Diane, I'm scared. Not of losing a lawsuit. I know I told the truth. But I'm scared of what fighting would cost. I have 5 kids to support. I can't afford a legal battle, even if I'm in the right. That's exactly why organizations like mine exist, Diane said firmly. Helen, what Stephen is doing is called SLAP. Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. It's when someone uses the legal system to silence critics or shut down public discussion. Even if he doesn't have a real case, the threat of a lawsuit can be enough to scare people into silence. So what do I do? First, you don't sign anything. No NDAs, no agreements, nothing without running it by me first. Second, you document everything. Every communication from Stephen or his family, every interaction, every threat. Third, you continue living your life and telling your story. If he actually files a lawsuit, we'll fight it. And we'll win. Helen felt something loosen in her chest. Why are you doing this? Why me? Because your story represents something important. Women are told constantly that their worth is tied to their reproductive capacity. You're proving that's false. Women are told to stay quiet about difficult divorces to keep the peace. You're proving that speaking truth is more important than false peace. Women are told they can't do it alone. You're proving they can. Diane paused. Plus, I'm a divorced single mother of twins. I know exactly what you're up against." They talked for another 30 minutes, Diane asking detailed questions about the marriage, the divorce, the circumstances around Stephen's invitation. By the end of the call, Helen felt protected in a way she hadn't since this whole media circus began. That afternoon at work, Helen was checking on a patient, a 7-year-old boy recovering from appendix surgery, when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Brittany. Can we talk? Not about Stephen or Patricia. About being a mom. I'm drowning here and I don't know what to do." Helen stared at the message. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to maintain the boundaries she'd tried to establish after Patricia's complaint to the hospital. But another part of her, the part that remembered the terrifying early days of motherhood, couldn't leave Brittany struggling. She texted back, "Call me after 8 p.m. when my kids are in bed. I can talk then." Brittany called at 8:07 p.m., and Helen could hear a baby crying in the background. "I'm sorry," Brittany said immediately. "I shouldn't have reached out. I just don't know who else to talk to." "What's going on?" "Christopher won't stop crying. He's been screaming for 3 hours straight. I've fed him, changed him, burped him, rocked him. Nothing works. Patricia keeps telling me I'm doing it wrong, that I need to let the baby nurse take over, but I can't. I can't just hand my baby to a stranger because he's crying." Brittany's voice broke. "Am I a bad mother?" "No," Helen said firmly. "You're a new mother. There's a difference. Is Christopher running a fever?" "No, 98.6 degrees. Any rash? Unusual stool? Difficulty breathing?" "No, nothing like that. He's just screaming." "Okay, first, you're not a bad mother. Babies cry. Sometimes they cry for reasons we can't figure out, and it's frustrating as hell, but it doesn't mean you're failing." Helen's voice softened with understanding. "Second, Patricia's wrong. You don't need to hand your baby over to anyone. You need support, not replacement." "But what if I can't do this? What if I'm not cut out for motherhood?" "Brittany, every mother has moments of doubt, especially in those early weeks. I had 5 newborns, and there were nights when I sat on the bathroom floor crying because I didn't know how I was going to make it through. But you do. Somehow you do." They talked for 20 minutes, Helen walking Brittany through various soothing techniques, discussing colic and gas and the possibility of reflux. By the end of the call, Christopher's crying had settled to whimpers, and Brittany sounded marginally more calm. "Thank you," Brittany said. "I know this is complicated, with everything between our families. But you're the only person who talks to me like I'm capable instead of incompetent. You are capable. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After they hung up, Helen sat with her thoughts. She was helping Stephen's wife navigate new motherhood, the same motherhood that Stephen had denied Helen the chance to experience with him. There was irony there, certainly, but there was also something else, a kind of closure, maybe, or an understanding that their stories, while connected, were separate. Stephen had been her past. These 5 sleeping children upstairs were her present and future. And Brittany was just another woman trying to find her footing in the chaos of new motherhood, deserving of compassion regardless of who her husband was. On Thanksgiving Day, November 27, 2025, Helen hosted dinner at her townhouse for the first time since the quintuplets were born. Her parents came, of course. Keisha and her boyfriend Jerome. A few friends from work. The house was packed, noisy, and chaotic. Exactly how Helen liked it. As they sat around the table, or rather, multiple tables pushed together to accommodate everyone, Dorothy asked everyone to share what they were grateful for this year. When it came to Helen's turn, she looked around at the faces surrounding her. Her parents, who'd stood by her through everything. Dorothy scooped up Jasmine, who'd been tugging on her leg. "Your mama's going to be famous, little girl. She's going to show the world what strength looks like." During a brief lull while the quintuplets were occupied with toys and snacks, Claire sat down with Helen for what she called a contextual interview. Basically, setting the stage for viewers who hadn't seen the original news interview. "Tell me about your marriage to Stephen," Claire prompted gently. "Take me back to the beginning." Helen settled into her couch, coffee cup in hand, and began to speak. She talked about meeting Steven in 2017 at a charity event in Baltimore, about their whirlwind courtship, about believing she'd found her person. She talked about the early days of marriage, the joy and the hope. And then she talked about the diagnosis. When the doctor said PCOS, my first thought was relief, Helen admitted. Because at least there was a name for what was happening. At least it wasn't just me being broken. But then Patricia, Steven's mother, she made it clear that a name didn't matter. What mattered was that I couldn't give Steven children easily. And in her world, that made me defective. What did Steven say when his mother said these things? Helen's laugh was bitter. Nothing. That was the problem. He said nothing when she called me barren at a family dinner. He said nothing when she suggested he should cut his losses and find someone who could give him an heir. He just stood there silent, while his mother dismantled my worth piece by piece. That must have been incredibly painful. It destroyed me. Helen's voice was soft now, reflective. I started believing her. Started thinking maybe I was defective. Maybe I wasn't worth fighting for. By the time Steven filed for divorce, part of me was almost relieved because at least I wouldn't have to keep trying to be enough for people who decided I never would be. The camera captured everything. The pain in Helen's eyes, the strength in her voice, the way her hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. This was the raw truth that Helen had kept hidden for years, now being documented for the world to see. What changed? Claire asked. What made you decide to pursue IVF on your own? Anger, Helen said simply. I got angry. Not at Steven or Patricia. Well, at them too, but at myself. I was angry that I'd let them convince me I couldn't be a mother. I was angry that I'd tied my worth to their approval. So I decided to prove them wrong. Not to them, but to myself. And you did. Helen looked over at her 5 children, now gathered around Dorothy for story time. I did. 5 times over. The afternoon filming session captured Helen at work. The hospital had agreed to limited filming in non-patient areas, so the crew documented Helen in the break room, reviewing charts, consulting with other nurses. They filmed her interacting with colleagues, showcasing the professional side of her life that viewers hadn't seen. Ramona, her coworker and friend, agreed to a brief interview. Helen is one of the best nurses I've ever worked with, Ramona told the camera. She's compassionate, detail-oriented, and she never lets her personal life interfere with patient care. When I found out she was raising quintuplets alone, I couldn't believe it. Most people can barely handle 1 kid and a full-time job. Helen makes it look almost easy, though I know it's anything but. What was your reaction when you heard about the baby shower incident? Claire asked. Ramona grinned. Oh, I loved that. Loved it. Steven Mahler thought he was going to humiliate Helen, and instead she showed up looking like a queen with 5 beautiful children. That's not revenge. That's just karma doing her job. Over the next few weeks, filming became part of Helen's routine. The crew came twice a week, capturing different aspects of her life. They filmed her taking the quintuplets to the park, bundled up against January cold. They filmed a typical evening: dinner, bath time, bedtime stories, the epic nightly routine that somehow always took 3 times longer than it should. They filmed a Sunday at her parents' house, where Robert grilled despite the cold while Dorothy marshaled the chaos of 5 grandchildren running through the house. They captured the love and support that had made Helen's single motherhood possible. On January 24, 2026, the crew filmed what they called a milestone moment: the quintuplets' first dance class. Helen had enrolled them in a toddler movement class at a local studio, mostly as a way to burn off energy and maybe, hopefully, improve coordination. The class was predictably chaotic. Nora took to it immediately, following the instructor's movements with surprising grace. Noah spent most of the time spinning in circles until he got dizzy. Chloe kept trying to do her own choreography, completely ignoring the instructor. Jasmine and Liam held hands and swayed to the music, creating their own twin dance that bore no resemblance to what they were supposed to be doing. Helen watched from the sidelines, simultaneously mortified and proud. Her children were so completely themselves, so unapologetically individual despite being part of a set. That was perhaps her greatest accomplishment as a mother. raising quintuplets who saw themselves as 5 separate people rather than one unit. After the class, as Helen was helping the children into their coats, another mother approached her. The woman was in her early 30s, blonde, with the kind of careful appearance that suggested significant effort. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you Helen Coleman?" From the news. Helen tensed, unsure if this would be a positive or negative interaction. "I am. I just wanted to thank you. I saw your interview, and my husband and I have been struggling with infertility for 3 years. I have PCOS too. We were about to give up, but your story gave us hope. We're starting IVF next month." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so glad. I hope it works for you. Can I ask you something?" The woman leaned in, lowering her voice. "How did you find the strength to do it alone? I have my husband and I'm still terrified. I can't imagine going through it solo." "You find strength you didn't know you had," Helen said simply. "When the alternative is giving up on something you want that badly, you discover you're capable of more than you ever imagined." The cameras captured the entire exchange, and later, Claire told Helen it would be a powerful moment in the documentary. "That's what this story is really about," Claire explained. "Not just your journey, but how your journey inspires others. You're giving women permission to be strong, to pursue their dreams even when the path is difficult." But not everyone was inspired. In early February, Helen received a certified letter from a lawyer. Not Stephen's lawyer, but a new one representing Patricia Mahler specifically. The letter was formal and threatening, accusing Helen of defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress for her ongoing campaign of vilification against Patricia. It demanded that Helen issue a public apology, retract all negative statements about Patricia, and cease participating in the documentary. Helen called Diane Portman immediately. "This is harassment," Diane said after Helen read her the letter. "Patricia is trying to intimidate you into silence. She's not going to sue, she doesn't have a case. But she's hoping the threat is enough to scare you off." "What do I do?" "You do nothing. I'll respond to her lawyer, make it clear that you've done nothing illegal or actionable, and that any further harassment will be met with legal consequences. Helen, you need to understand something. People like Patricia Mahler are used to controlling narratives. They're used to making uncomfortable truths disappear through intimidation. The fact that you're not backing down terrifies her." "Good," Helen said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. She should be terrified. She should know that the woman she called defective is thriving, that the daughter-in-law she tried to destroy is stronger than ever. Diane was quiet for a moment. "You've come a long way from the woman who was afraid of a lawsuit." "I have 5 reasons to be brave," Helen said, looking at her children playing in the living room. "They're watching me. I need to show them that you don't back down from bullies, no matter how powerful they think they are." On February 14, 2026, Valentine's Day, Helen took the quintuplets to a local children's museum for what was supposed to be a fun outing. The documentary crew was filming, capturing the family in a more recreational setting. They were in the water play area, all 5 children gleefully splashing and soaking themselves, when Helen noticed a familiar figure across the room. Stephen. He was with Brittany and baby Christopher, who couldn't have been more than 3 months old. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded museum, and time seemed to slow. Helen's first instinct was to leave, to avoid the awkwardness of an encounter. But then she thought, no, this is a public space. I have as much right to be here as he does. She turned back to her children, deliberately ignoring Stephen's presence. But out of the corner of her eye, she could see him watching her. Watching the quintuplets splashing and laughing. Watching the documentary crew filming. After about 10 minutes, Brittany approached. She was pushing Christopher in a stroller, and she looked exhausted. That particular exhaustion of new motherhood that went bone deep. "Helen," Brittany said softly. "Hi." "Hi, Brittany. How are you?" "How's Christopher?" "He's good. He's finally sleeping more than 2 hours at a stretch, so that's progress." Brittany glanced back at Stephen, who was pretending to be very interested in an exhibit about butterflies. "I wanted to say thank you For the advice you gave me when he was first born. And for not treating me like the enemy." "You're not the enemy," Helen said gently. "You're just another woman trying to navigate motherhood while dealing with difficult in-laws." Brittany laughed, a tired but genuine sound. "That's one way to put it. Patricia has been intense. Stephen's been." She trailed off, seeming to reconsider how much to share. "It's been hard. It usually is in the beginning." Helen gestured to the quintuplets. "But it gets better. The babies grow up, you find your footing, and eventually, you figure out what works for your family. Even when your family includes a mother-in-law who thinks she knows better than you about everything? Especially then. You have to set boundaries, Brittany. Hard boundaries. Or it never gets better, it just gets more entrenched." They talked for a few more minutes, Brittany asking questions about sleep training and teething and all the small concerns of new motherhood. Helen answered honestly, sharing what had worked for her and what hadn't. Stephen eventually approached, his expression unreadable. "Helen," he said stiffly. "Stephen." An awkward silence stretched between them. The documentary cameras were still rolling, capturing the surreal reunion of ex-spouses in a children's museum. "Your kids seem happy," Stephen said finally, nodding toward the quintuplets. "They are. And you're doing well?" "I am." More silence. Stephen shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to say something but not knowing how. "I saw that you're doing a documentary," he said eventually. "My mother thinks it's a continuation of your campaign against our family." Helen felt anger flash through her, quick and hot. "Your mother needs to understand that my life isn't about her or you anymore. I'm telling my story, my experience, my truth. If that makes her uncomfortable, that's not my problem. She's threatening another lawsuit. Let her. I have excellent legal representation, and unlike her, I actually have truth on my side." Helen softened her voice slightly. "Stephen, I'm not trying to destroy you or your family. I'm just refusing to be silent about what happened to me. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to make me look bad." "You made yourself look bad," Helen said quietly. "I'm just telling the truth about it." Brittany, who'd been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "She's right, Stephen. Everything she said publicly matches what you told me privately about your marriage. The only difference is that when she says it, you look worse because people see you chose to leave her rather than work through problems." Stephen turned to his wife, surprised. "Brittany." "No, I'm tired of pretending. Helen hasn't lied about anything. She hasn't exaggerated or made you into a villain. She's just told her story, and the fact that it makes you uncomfortable means maybe you should examine your own actions instead of blaming her for talking about them." Helen stared at Brittany with new respect. This was growth. This was a woman finding her voice. "I need to get back to my kids," Helen said, ending the conversation. "Brittany, I meant what I said about calling if you need advice. Stephen, I genuinely hope you're a better father to Christopher than you were a husband to me." She walked away, her hand shaking slightly but her head held high. The cameras had captured the entire exchange, and later, Claire told her it would be one of the most powerful scenes in the documentary. "The way you handled that, with grace and honesty and without backing down, it was remarkable," Claire said. "And Brittany standing up to him? That was unexpected." "She's stronger than she knows," Helen said. "She just needed to remember that." That evening, after the quintuplets were in bed, Helen received a text from Brittany. "Thank you for being kind to me today. And thank you for showing me what it looks like to stand up for yourself. Stephen and I had a long talk after we left the museum. I told him things are going to change, or I'm leaving. I think he finally heard me." Helen responded, "I'm proud of you. That took courage. Whatever you decide, make sure it's right for you and Christopher." "I will." And Helen, "For what it's worth, I don't think you're trying to hurt Stephen. I think you're just trying to heal yourself. There's nothing wrong with that." Helen stared at that message for a long time. Brittany understood what Stephen never had, that Helen's journey wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about healing, about reclaiming her narrative, about refusing to let someone else's rejection define her worth. In late February, the documentary crew filmed what Jennifer called a reflective segment. Helen sitting alone in her living room after the children were asleep, talking about her journey and what it all meant. "Do you regret going to the baby shower?" Claire asked from behind the camera. Helen considered the question. "No. I needed to do it. Not for Stephen or Patricia, but for myself. I needed to walk back into that house as the woman I'd become and realize that I'd not only survived, I'd thrived." What do you want people to take away from your story? I want women to know that your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. I want them to know that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, the marriage that ends, the diagnosis that devastates you, the rejection that breaks your heart, sometimes that's actually the beginning of your real life. Helen's voice was strong now, certain. Stephen leaving me felt like the end of the world. But it was actually the beginning of this world, the one where I'm a mother to 5 incredible children, where I have a career I love, where I wake up every day knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if he hadn't left? Sometimes. But, honestly, I'm grateful he did. Because if he'd stayed, I'd have spent my whole life trying to be enough for someone who'd already decided I wasn't. And these 5 children, Helen gestured upstairs where her babies slept, they wouldn't exist. Nora, Chloe, Jasmine, Noah, and Liam are only here because Stephen left. So in a weird way, his rejection was the greatest gift he ever gave me. That's a generous way to look at it. It's not generosity. It's just truth. My life is better without him. My children are better off without him. And someday, when they're old enough to ask why they don't have a daddy, I'll tell them the truth. That they have something better. They have a mother who wanted them so badly she moved heaven and earth to bring them into this world. The interview went on for another hour, Helen answering questions about single motherhood, about fertility struggles, about divorce and healing and rebuilding. By the end, she felt emptied out but also lighter, like she'd released something she'd been carrying for too long. On March 1, 2026, Helen got a call from Dr. Chen, her IVF doctor. "Helen, I have something interesting to tell you. Remember how I mentioned that your interview had brought in new patients?" "Yes. It's become a significant influx. In the past 3 months, we've had 47 new patient inquiries specifically mentioning your story. 47 women who were afraid to try IVF or who'd given up hope, now willing to take that chance because you showed them it was possible." Helen felt tears streaming down her face. 47. 47. Your courage is creating ripples, Helen. You're changing lives in ways you can't even see. That night, Helen allowed herself to feel it all. The pride, the validation, the understanding that her pain had meaning. That her struggle had purpose. That her story mattered not just to her, but to countless women walking similar paths. She thought about the girl she'd been when she married Stephen. Young, hopeful, eager to please. She thought about the broken woman she'd been when the divorce was finalized. Lost, devastated, convinced she was defective. And she looked at the woman she was now, strong, whole, complete. A mother, a healer, a survivor, a truth-teller. The journey from there to here had been brutal, but it had also been beautiful, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. April 2026 brought with it the kind of spring that made Maryland residents forget they'd ever complained about winter. Cherry blossoms exploded across the state, and the temperature climbed to a perfect 70 degrees that made everyone want to live outdoors. On Saturday, April 12th, Helen was at the Columbia lakefront with the quintuplets, Dorothy, and Keisha for what was supposed to be a simple picnic. The documentary crew had one more day of filming scheduled, and Jennifer wanted to capture the family in a relaxed, joyful setting. "Mama, can we feed the ducks?" Nora asked, tugging on Helen's sleeve. "The sign says not to feed the ducks, baby." "But they look hungry." "They're not hungry, they're just hoping you have food." "There's a difference." Helen helped Jasmine spread out the picnic blanket while keeping one eye on Noah, who was dangerously close to wading into the lake. The crew set up their equipment with practiced efficiency, and soon they were filming the most normal of activities. Children playing, adults chatting, sandwiches being eaten, and the occasional toddler meltdown that came with the territory. Helen was in the middle of preventing Chloe from sharing her sandwich with an ambitious squirrel when her phone rang. Unknown number, but something made her answer. Helen Coleman. Speaking. This is Marcus Reynolds from the National Fertility Association. I'm calling because we've been following your story with great interest. We'd like to invite you to speak at our annual conference in Chicago this June. Helen nearly dropped her phone. Speak. Like give a speech. Yes. We host a conference every year for fertility specialists, patients, and advocates. This year's theme is Breaking Barriers. Fertility in the Modern Age. Your story, becoming a single mother of quintuplets through IVF after being told you couldn't have children. It embodies everything our conference stands for. We'd love for you to share your journey with our attendees. I'm not a public speaker. I'm a nurse who happened to go on TV once. Twice, actually, if you count the morning show appearance last month, Marcus said with a gentle laugh. Helen, I've seen your interviews. You're articulate, honest, and inspiring. You don't need to be a professional speaker. You just need to be yourself. Can I think about it? Of course. But Helen, there will be about 1,500 people at this conference. Fertility specialists from around the world, patients at various stages of their journeys, advocacy organizations. Your words could reach people who desperately need to hear them. After they hung up, Helen sat on the picnic blanket, staring at her phone in disbelief. What was that about? Keisha asked, settling down beside her with Liam on her lap. Someone wants me to speak at a fertility conference in Chicago. In front of 1,500 people. Keisha's eyes went wide. Are you going to do it? I don't know. Public speaking terrifies me. Helen, you've been on television. You've been doing a documentary. You've already told your story to thousands of people. That's different. That's structured, edited, controlled. This would be me live in front of hundreds of strangers, trying not to forget what I'm saying or trip over my own feet. Dorothy, overhearing the conversation, joined them. What's this about Chicago? After Helen explained, her mother's expression turned thoughtful. You know what I think. I think you've been given a platform for a reason. Not everyone gets that, Helen. Most people go through struggles in silence, and their stories die with them. But you have a chance to make your struggle mean something bigger. But what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing, or I can't articulate what I want to say, or I just freeze up there? Then you'll be human, Dorothy said simply. And that's exactly what those people need to see. Not a perfect, polished speaker, but a real woman who's been through hell and came out the other side. Your imperfection is your strength, baby. Don't you see that? Over the next few days, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the invitation. She researched the National Fertility Association, read testimonials from past conference attendees, watched videos of previous speakers. What struck her most was how clinical and medical most of the presentations were. They were informative and important, but they lacked the emotional truth of what it actually felt like to go through fertility struggles. On April 15th, Helen called Marcus Reynolds back. I'll do it, she said before she could change her mind. I'll speak at your conference. That's wonderful. We're so excited to have you. But I need help. I've never written a speech before. I don't know how to structure something like this. We have people who can help with that. Our communications team will work with you to develop your presentation. The most important thing is that it stays authentic to your experience. Over the next several weeks, Helen worked with a woman named Patricia. Different Patricia, thank God, who specialized in helping first-time speakers craft their narratives. They had weekly video calls where Helen would talk about her journey, and Patricia would help her organize those thoughts into a coherent structure. What's the most important message you want people to take away? Patricia, the speech coach, asked during one of their sessions. Helen thought about it. That your worth isn't determined by your ability to have children, but also that if you want children and face obstacles, those obstacles don't have to be the end of the story. There are options. There are paths forward. You just have to be brave enough to take them. Beautiful. That's your thesis. Everything else in your speech should support that central message. By early May, Helen had a draft of her speech. It was 15 minutes long, short enough to hold attention, long enough to tell her story properly. She practiced it constantly. While folding laundry, while driving to work, while giving the quintuplets their baths. The children thought it was hilarious that Mama kept talking to herself. Mama's rehearsing, Helen explained to Nora, who'd asked why Helen was saying the same words over and over. For what? For a big talk I'm giving. Like show and tell, but for grown-ups. What are you showing? Helen smiled. My story. And you five are the best part of it. On May 20th, the documentary crew came for their final day of filming. They wanted to capture Helen preparing for the Chicago trip, the anxiety and excitement of this new chapter. How do you feel about everything that's happened since the baby shower? Claire asked during what would be the last formal interview. Overwhelmed mostly, Helen admitted. 7 months ago, I was just a single mom trying to get through each day. Now I'm doing a documentary, preparing to speak at a national conference, and somehow I've become this symbol of resilience or whatever. It's surreal. Do you regret any of it? Not the sharing my story part. Maybe I regret not anticipating how big it would become. But the actual act of telling my truth? No. I needed to do that for myself, and if it helps others, that's a bonus. What about Stephen? Have you heard from him since the museum encounter? No. Brittany texts me occasionally with baby questions, but Stephen and I have no contact. And honestly, that's how I prefer it. He's part of my past, not my present. His mother Patricia filed another complaint, this time with the Maryland Board of Nursing. Helen's expression hardened. I know. It was dismissed immediately because I've never violated any nursing standards or ethics. But yes, she's still trying to silence me through intimidation. It's not working. What would you say to her if you could? Helen looked directly into the camera. I'd say thank you. Thank you for showing me that I didn't need your approval or your son's love to build a meaningful life. Thank you for pushing me out of that family because it led me to my real family, these 5 incredible children. And thank you for continuing to come after me, because every time you try to intimidate me, you prove exactly what kind of people you are, and you strengthen my resolve to keep speaking truth. Claire smiled. That's going in the documentary. The final filming took place at Helen's parents' house during a Sunday dinner. The crew captured the chaos and warmth of the Coleman family. Robert grilling burgers, Dorothy marshalling everyone for prayer, the quintuplets running wild in the backyard, and Helen in the middle of it all, laughing and alive and so clearly loved. This is my foundation, Helen told the camera as she watched her children play. These people, my parents, Keisha, my kids, they're why I'm still standing. When Stephen left, I thought I'd lost my family. But I hadn't. I just found my real one. As the crew was packing up, Jennifer pulled Helen aside. I want you to know something. I've been making documentaries for 12 years. I've profiled CEOs, artists, activists, survivors of every kind of trauma you can imagine. And your story, it's one of the most powerful I've encountered. Not because it's the most dramatic or traumatic, but because it's so honest. You didn't try to be anything other than yourself, and that authenticity is what makes this special. When will it air? Helen asked. August. It's being finalized now. The network is already excited about it. They think it's going to be one of their strongest pieces this year. After Jennifer and the crew left, Helen stood in her parents' backyard, watching the quintuplets chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. In 3 weeks, she'd be on a plane to Chicago. In 4 months, the documentary would air. Her private life had become increasingly public. Her personal journey now a shared story. But looking at her children's joy, their absolute security in being loved, Helen knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, publicity, criticism, praise, or more attacks from a Mahler family, it was worth it. Because her story was helping people. Real people with real struggles who needed to know they weren't alone. On June 5, 2026, Helen boarded a plane to Chicago. Keisha had agreed to stay with the quintuplets along with Dorothy, turning Helen's absence into an adventure for the kids. It was the first time Helen had been away from them overnight since they were born, and the separation anxiety was real on both sides. "Mama will be back tomorrow," Helen promised, hugging each child goodbye at least 3 times. "Auntie Keisha and Grandma are going to take such good care of you. Bring us presents," Noah demanded. "I'll bring you hugs and stories." "That's better than presents." "No, presents are better," Chloe corrected with toddler logic. The flight to Chicago gave Helen 2 hours of uninterrupted time to review her speech one last time. She'd memorized it weeks ago, but anxiety made her read it again and again, terrified she'd forget everything the moment she stepped on stage. The National Fertility Conference was held at a massive convention center downtown. When Helen checked into the speaker's hotel that evening, she was given a badge that read, "Speaker Helen Coleman, Triumph Through Adversity." "Triumph through adversity," she muttered to herself. No pressure. That night she barely slept. She kept running through her speech in her mind, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. What if she cried? What if her voice shook? What if people thought she was exploiting her children for attention? At 6 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went for a walk along Lake Michigan. The city was just waking up, and there was something peaceful about watching the sunrise over the water. She thought about her children, probably still sleeping back home. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from broken wife to single mother to reluctant public figure. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've done harder things." The conference began at 9 a.m. with a keynote speech from a renowned fertility specialist. Helen sat in the audience, surrounded by hundreds of people. Doctors, nurses, patients, advocates, all united by their connection to fertility issues. Some were professionals seeking the latest research. Others were patients desperate for hope. All of them were here because fertility mattered to them in some profound way. Helen's presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in one of the main conference halls. As the time approached, her anxiety ratcheted up to near-panic levels. Marcus Reynolds found her backstage, where she was pacing and muttering her opening lines. "Helen, you're going to be great," he assured her. "What if I'm not? What if I freeze up there?" Then you take a breath, look at the audience, and remember why you're here. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be real. At 1:55 p.m., Helen stood in the wings, listening as the previous speaker finished their presentation on egg freezing technology. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought the microphone pack clipped to her belt might pick it up. "Next up," the moderator announced, "we have Helen Coleman, a pediatric nurse from Maryland whose journey through PCOS, divorce, and single motherhood via IVF resulted in quintuplets. Please welcome Helen to the stage." Helen walked out to polite applause, her legs shaking so badly she was sure everyone could see. The stage lights were bright, making it hard to see individual faces in the audience, which was both terrifying and comforting. She reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at 1,500 strangers waiting to hear her story. "Hi," she said, her voice only slightly shaky. "My name is Helen Coleman, and 7 years ago I was told I was defective." The audience went completely silent. Not in those exact words, of course. The doctor who diagnosed me with PCOS was kind and professional. She explained that my condition would make getting pregnant naturally very difficult, but not impossible. She discussed options, including IVF. She was supportive and informative. Helen paused, gathering her courage. "But my mother-in-law, she called me barren. She said I was defective. She told my husband, my ex-husband now, that he should cut his losses and find someone who could give him children the way nature intended. And my husband, he filed for divorce." She could see people in the front rows leaning forward, engaged. "I spent 3 years in a marriage where my worth was determined entirely by my reproductive capacity. And when that capacity was questioned, I was discarded like a broken appliance that couldn't perform its function. The divorce devastated me. Not because I'd lost my husband, though that hurt, but because I'd started believing what they said about me. That I was defective. That I was less than. That I had failed at the most basic biological function of womanhood." Helen's voice grew stronger as she continued, telling the story of her journey through IVF, the fears and hopes, the failures, and finally the success. When the doctor told me I was pregnant with quintuplets, my first thought was, this has to be a mistake. My second thought was, how am I going to do this alone? And my third thought, the one that mattered most, was, I did it. Despite everything they said about me, I did it. She talked about the pregnancy, the birth, the terrifying early days with 5 newborns. She talked about the exhaustion, the doubt, the moments when she didn't think she could survive another day. But I did survive. And so did they. All 5 of my children, Nora, Chloe, Jasmine, Noah, and Liam, are healthy, happy, thriving toddlers who will never know that the world once told their mother she couldn't have them. Helen gripped the podium, looking out at the audience. Here's what I want you to understand. Your worth is not determined by your fertility. Not by whether you can have children easily or at all. Not by whether you need medical intervention to conceive. Not by whether you choose to pursue parenthood or not. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, yours. She saw people nodding, some wiping their eyes. But I also want you to know this. If you want children and face obstacles, those obstacles don't have to be the end of your story. There are paths forward. They're not easy, they're not cheap, and they're not guaranteed. But they exist. IVF exists. Adoption exists. Surrogacy exists. Foster care exists. And if you choose any of these paths, or if you choose not to pursue parenthood at all, you are making a valid, worthy choice. Helen took a breath, preparing for her closing. 4 years ago, my ex-husband invited me to his baby shower. I think he wanted me to show up sad and childless, a confirmation that leaving me had been the right decision. Instead, I showed up with 5 children. And you know what? It wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about closure. It was about walking back into the life I'd left and realizing that being pushed out of it was the best thing that ever happened to me. She paused, her voice softening. So whether you're a patient struggling with infertility, a doctor treating those patients, or someone supporting a loved one through this journey, I want you to remember. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the setup for the best thing. Sometimes rejection is redirection. Sometimes the door that closes in your face is protecting you from a room you were never meant to be in. Helen looked directly into the audience, making eye contact with as many people as she could. I am not defective. You are not defective. We are beautifully, perfectly human. Complicated and struggling and trying our best. And that is more than enough. She stepped back from the podium as the audience erupted into applause. Not polite conference applause, but genuine, emotional, standing ovation applause. Helen felt tears streaming down her face as she waved and walked off stage. Backstage, Marcus was waiting with a huge smile. Helen, that was extraordinary. People are crying out there. I cried too, Helen admitted, wiping her eyes. The best speeches make everyone cry. It means you reached them. For the rest of the day, Helen was stopped constantly by conference attendees. Women shared their own fertility stories, thanking her for her honesty. Doctors told her they'd be sharing her speech with their patients. One woman, sobbing, told Helen that she'd been about to give up on IVF, but Helen's words had given her the courage to try one more time. Thank you, the woman said, gripping Helen's hands. Thank you for showing us that it's possible. That evening, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, Helen called home to say good night to the quintuplets. They were full of stories about their day with Keisha and Grandma, and their voices were the sweetest sound Helen had ever heard. I miss you, Mama, Nora said. I miss you too, baby. But I'll be home tomorrow, and I'll tell you all about my adventure. Did you get presents? Helen laughed. I got hugs and stories, just like I promised. After hanging up, Helen sat in her hotel room and allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what had happened. She'd stood in front of 1,500 people and told her truth. She'd been vulnerable and real and completely herself. And it had mattered. It had reached people. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. A video of your speech is already on YouTube and it has 50,000 views. Girl, you're going viral. Helen opened YouTube and found the video. Someone had recorded her speech and posted it with the title, "Single Mother of Quintuplets Tells Her Powerful Fertility Story." The comments were overwhelmingly positive. "I'm crying at work. This woman is incredible. I have PCOS and I've been too afraid to try IVF. This gave me hope. Her ex-husband is probably regretting everything right now. This is what strength looks like." Helen read comment after comment, each one a reminder that her story mattered, that her pain had purpose, that her courage to speak was creating ripples she couldn't even see. She thought about the girl she'd been when she married Stephen, eager to please, desperate for approval, tying her worth to someone else's validation. That girl was gone. In her place was this woman, strong, complete, unafraid to stand in her truth. The journey from there to here had been brutal and beautiful in equal measure. And she wouldn't change a single step. The video of Helen's speech went viral in ways that felt both surreal and overwhelming. By June 10, 2026, just 5 days after the conference, it had been viewed over 5 million times. News outlets were calling. Morning shows wanted interviews. Helen's inbox was flooded with messages from women around the world sharing their own fertility struggles. "This is insane," Helen said to Keisha on a video call, watching the view count climb in real time. "I gave one speech." "One speech that touched a nerve," Keisha corrected. "Helen, you said what millions of women have felt but couldn't articulate. You gave voice to something that needed to be said." But with increased visibility came increased scrutiny. On June 12, a conservative blog published an article titled, "The Selfishness of Single Motherhood by Choice: Helen Coleman's Cautionary Tale." The piece argued that Helen had deliberately brought children into the world without a father, that she was promoting a dangerous agenda that undermined traditional family values, and that her quintuplets would suffer from not having a male role model. Helen read it in her car during her lunch break at the hospital and felt physically ill. The article twisted her story, painting her as selfish and reckless rather than strong and determined. Worse, it brought her children into the criticism, suggesting they were being harmed by her choices. She called Diane Portman immediately. "I just read the most horrible article about me. They're saying I'm damaging my children by raising them alone. Can they do that?" Unfortunately, yes. It's protected opinion and speech. They're not making false factual claims. They're just offering a terrible judgmental opinion. Diane's voice was sympathetic. "I know it hurts, Helen. But you need to understand something. The more visible you become, the more people will have opinions about you. Some will love you. Some will hate you. Most won't actually know you at all. But they're attacking my children. They're attacking your choices regarding your children, which is different. I know it doesn't feel different, but legally it is." Diane paused. "Helen, you can't control what people say about you. You can only control how you respond. And my advice: don't respond at all. Don't give them the satisfaction." But not responding felt impossible when her phone was blowing up with messages from friends and family who'd seen the article. Her father was furious, ready to write an angry letter to the blog. Keisha wanted to flood their social media with counter-arguments. Even Ramona at work had seen it and was livid. "Those people don't know you or your kids," Ramona said during their shift. "They're just hateful trolls hiding behind traditional values to justify their judgment." That evening, as Helen was bathing the quintuplets, all 5 squeezed into her oversized tub, creating more water on the floor than staying in the tub. She looked at her children and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. These babies were loved. They were cared for. They had grandparents who adored them, aunts and uncles through Keisha's family who treated them like their own, teachers at daycare who celebrated their milestones. Yes, they didn't have a father. But they had something more important, a mother who'd moved heaven and earth to bring them into existence, who loved them with a ferocity that sometimes scared her with its intensity. "Mama, why are you crying?" Nora asked, always the most observant. "Because I love you so much, baby girl. All of you. So much." "We love you too, Mama," Nora announced, and the others echoed her in their own ways. Noah splashing enthusiastically, Chloe blowing bubbles, Jasmine and Liam reaching for her with soapy hands. Whatever strangers on the internet thought about her choices didn't matter. Her children were happy, healthy, and deeply loved. That was what mattered. On June 15th, Helen received an unexpected call from Brittany. "Helen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to talk to someone who'd understand." Brittany's voice was tight with stress. "Did you see what Patricia posted on Facebook about you?" Helen's stomach dropped. "No. What did she post?" She shared that horrible article about you being selfish for having children alone. And she wrote a whole post about how single motherhood is destroying society and how children need fathers. She didn't mention you by name, but everyone knows who she's talking about." "Of course she did," Helen said bitterly. "She's been trying to tear me down for 4 years. Why stop now?" "But Helen, that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I commented on her post. I told her she was being cruel and judgmental, and that you were one of the strongest women I'd ever met. We had a huge fight, in the comments, in person, everything. And Stephen." Brittany's voice broke. "Stephen took her side. Again. He said I was being disrespectful to his mother, that I didn't understand family loyalty." Helen closed her eyes, a familiar ache of recognition settling in her chest. "I'm sorry, Brittany. I really am." "I'm done," Brittany said, her voice suddenly firm. "I'm done with Patricia controlling my life. I'm done with Stephen choosing her over me. I'm done pretending this is a healthy marriage. I called a lawyer today." "Are you sure? Christopher is only 6 months old. That's exactly why I need to do this now. Before he's old enough to remember the fights. Before I waste years trying to fix something that can't be fixed." Brittany took a shaky breath. "You were right, Helen. When you told me that Stephen would always choose his mother over me, I didn't want to believe you. But you were right. And I deserve better than that. Christopher deserves better than that. What can I do to help?" "Just be there if I need advice. I know this is weird, me leaning on my husband's ex-wife, but you're the only person who truly understands what I'm dealing with." "I'm here," Helen promised. "Anytime you need me." After they hung up, Helen felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for Brittany, going through the painful process of leaving a marriage. Vindication that her warnings had been accurate. But mostly she felt a deep weariness. The Mahler family drama was supposed to be behind her. Yet here it was, still entangling her life 4 years after her divorce. The next morning, Helen woke to find her social media notifications exploding. During the night, someone had posted a side-by-side comparison. Patricia Mahler's Facebook post criticizing single motherhood next to photos of Helen at the fertility conference, speaking about her journey. The post was titled, "The Mother-in-Law Who Drove Her Away Now Criticizes Her Publicly." It had been shared thousands of times. Helen scrolled through the comments, which ranged from supportive to vicious. People were attacking Patricia, calling her toxic and hypocritical. Others were defending her, saying she had a right to her opinions about family structure. Some were speculating about Stephen's new marriage, noting that Brittany had commented negatively on Patricia's post. "This is a nightmare," Helen muttered. But then she noticed something else. Mixed in with the drama and speculation were hundreds of comments from women sharing their own stories. Women with fertility struggles. Women who'd left toxic marriages. Single mothers by choice or circumstance. Women who felt validated and empowered by Helen's refusal to be silenced. "My mother-in-law told me I was defective when I couldn't get pregnant. Helen's story gave me the courage to leave. I'm a single mom of twins through IVF and I've faced so much judgment. Thank you for showing us we're not alone." Patricia Mahler represents everything toxic about traditional family expectations. Helen represents freedom and strength. Helen sat at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold, reading story after story of women who saw themselves in her journey. The drama with the Mahler family was exhausting and painful, but it had created a space for these women to speak their truth too. Maybe that was worth the cost. On June 20th, Helen had a meeting with Jennifer Wu about the documentary's release. They met at a coffee shop in Columbia, and Jennifer brought along a rough cut of the film for Helen to review. "I want you to see it before we finalize anything," Jennifer explained. "This is your story, and you need to be comfortable with how we're telling it." They watched the documentary on Jennifer's laptop, headphones splitting the audio between them. Helen saw herself on screen. Exhausted, determined, vulnerable, strong. The film captured moments she'd forgotten, her hands shaking as she explained her PCOS diagnosis, the joy on her face when she talked about the quintuplets' birth, the steel in her voice when she confronted Stephen at the museum. But it also captured the quieter moments. Her reading bedtime stories to 5 sleepy toddlers, her laughing with Dorothy in the kitchen, her sitting alone on her porch at night, processing everything she'd been through. The documentary was 90 minutes long. It opened with footage of the baby shower, Helen arriving with the quintuplets, the shock on Stephen's face, the tension with Patricia. Then it flashed back to the beginning, telling Helen's story chronologically. The marriage, the diagnosis, the divorce, the decision to pursue IVF alone, the pregnancy, the birth, and the 2 years that followed. The confrontation at the museum was there, as was Helen's speech at the fertility conference. The documentary ended with Helen at home with her children, saying, "My life didn't turn out the way I planned. It turned out better." When the film ended, Helen was crying. Not from sadness, but from the recognition of how far she'd come. The woman on screen at the beginning, hopeful bride, devastated divorcee, felt like a different person than the woman at the end. Strong mother, confident speaker, survivor. "What do you think?" Jennifer asked gently. "It's beautiful," Helen whispered. "It's honest and raw and beautiful. But Jennifer, when this airs, it's going to explode. The Mahler family is going to lose their minds." "Probably. But Helen, we've been careful. We've documented everything accurately. We haven't sensationalized or exaggerated. We've simply told your truth." Jennifer squeezed Helen's hand. "You have the right to tell your story. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The documentary was scheduled to air on August 15, 2026, on a major cable network. The promotional campaign would begin in early July, which meant Helen had about 2 weeks before her life became even more public. She used that time to prepare. She talked to Diane Portman about potential legal ramifications. She warned her supervisor at the hospital that there might be renewed media attention. She sat down with her parents and Keisha to discuss how to handle the inevitable backlash. And she talked to the quintuplets, though at not quite 3 years old, they couldn't fully understand. "Mama's going to be on TV again," Helen explained one evening during dinner. "And some people might say not nice things about Mama. But that's okay because we know the truth. We know our family is full of love, right?" "Right." Nora agreed enthusiastically. "We have so much love." "So much love," Helen echoed, looking at her 5 beautiful children and feeling her heart could burst with it. On July 1st, the network released the first promotional trailer for the documentary. It was a 2-minute montage of powerful moments. Helen saying, "I was told I was defective," footage of the quintuplets playing, the confrontation with Stephen, Helen's conference speech, and ending with her declaration, "My life didn't turn out the way I planned. It turned out better." The trailer went viral immediately. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 10 million times across various platforms. #HelenColemanStrong was trending again. News outlets were running stories about the upcoming documentary. Entertainment Weekly published a feature titled, "The Single Mother Who Refused to Stay Silent." And Stephen Mahler's lawyer sent Helen a cease and desist letter. The letter demanded that Helen prevent the documentary from airing, claiming it constituted harassment, defamation, and invasion of privacy for Stephen and his family. It threatened immediate legal action if the documentary was broadcast. Helen forwarded the letter to Diane Portman, who called back within an hour, laughing. "They're desperate," Diane said. "This letter has no legal standing. The documentary is about your life, your experience. You have every right to tell that story. They're just trying to intimidate you into pulling it." Can they actually sue? They can file a lawsuit, sure. Anyone can file a lawsuit. But they won't win. And more importantly, if they try, it's going to generate even more publicity for the documentary and make them look like bullies trying to silence a survivor. Diane's voice turned serious. "Helen, I need you to understand something. The Mahlers are losing control of the narrative. For years, they've been able to tell their version of events. The sad story of Stephen's first marriage ending due to incompatibility. But now you're telling the truth, and the truth makes them look bad. They're panicking. Good, Helen said with more venom than she intended. Let them panic. I panicked for 3 years in that marriage. I panicked through IVF and pregnancy and the early days with 5 newborns. They don't get to shut me up because they're uncomfortable. That's exactly the spirit. Don't back down, Helen. You've come too far. On July 10th, Patricia Mahler gave an interview to a local Frederick newspaper. Her first public comment since Helen's story had gone viral. The article was titled, "Patricia Mahler Speaks Out. My former daughter-in-law is obsessed with destroying our family." In the interview, Patricia painted herself as the victim of Helen's campaign of harassment. She claimed that Helen had lied about the circumstances of her divorce and was exploiting her children for fame and sympathy. She suggested that Helen's mental health should be questioned and that someone should investigate whether the quintuplets were being properly cared for. Helen read the article at work during her break and felt rage unlike anything she'd experienced before. Patricia was now suggesting that Helen was an unfit mother, that her children might be in danger. It was one thing to attack Helen personally, but bringing the welfare of her children into question crossed a line. She called Diane Portman immediately. She's accusing me of being an unfit mother. Can she do that? Can I sue her for that? We could potentially pursue a defamation claim, yes. But Helen, I'm going to give you advice you might not want to hear. Let it go. Let it go. She's suggesting my children aren't safe with me. I know. And it's disgusting. But here's the thing. Patricia just gave an interview where she comes across as vindictive, cruel, and obsessed with attacking you. She's making herself look bad without you having to do anything. And if the documentary airs as scheduled, which it will, everyone will see that interview in context and realize she's been lying. Diane was right, but that didn't make it any easier. Helen spent the rest of her shift fuming, barely able to concentrate on patient care. When she got home that evening, Dorothy was waiting with the quintuplets, having seen the article. That woman is evil, Dorothy said bluntly. Pure evil. Who attacks a mother like that? Someone who's desperate, Helen said, pulling Chloe into her lap and breathing in the comforting smell of her daughter's baby shampoo. Diane says to ignore it, that Patricia is making herself look bad. Diane's right. But honey, I know it hurts. I know it makes you want to fight back. It does. But I'm trying to remember that the best revenge is living well. And I am living well. I have these 5 incredible kids, a career I love, people who support me. Patricia has her bitterness and her desperate need to control everyone around her. I know which life I'd rather have. On July 15th, Helen received an unexpected email from someone named Victoria Chen. No relation to either of her doctors named Chen. Victoria introduced herself as a literary agent who'd been following Helen's story and wanted to know if Helen had ever considered writing a book. A book about what? Helen wrote back. Victoria's response came quickly. About everything. Your journey through infertility, divorce, IVF, single motherhood of multiples. Helen, your story resonates with millions of women. A book would give you the space to tell it fully, in your own words, without the constraints of a documentary or interview format. I think it could be a bestseller. Helen stared at the email in disbelief. A book. She was a nurse, not a writer. But then again, she'd been a nurse, not a public speaker, and she'd given a speech that had been viewed millions of times. What do you think? She asked Keisha when they met for coffee that weekend. I think it's another opportunity to control your narrative. Plus, think about all the women who could benefit from reading a detailed account of what you went through. The good, the bad, the messy. It could be like a roadmap for women facing similar challenges. But I don't know how to write a book. You don't know how to do half the things you've done in the past year. You figured them out anyway. Helen met with Victoria Chen via video call the following week. Victoria was a sharp, energetic woman in her 40s who represented several memoir authors and had a track record of successful books about women's experiences. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Victoria said. Writing a book is hard work. But I've seen your interviews, watched your conference speech, read about you extensively. You have a story that needs to be told in depth and you have the voice to tell it. I'd be honored to represent you. If I did this, I'd want to be completely honest. About the pain, the doubt, the moments when I didn't think I'd make it. About the infertility treatments, the divorce, all of it. That's exactly what readers need. They don't need a sanitized, perfect story. They need truth. They need to know they're not alone in struggling. By the end of July, Helen had signed with Victoria and committed to writing a book. It would take months, maybe a year, but she'd started outlining her story, organizing her thoughts, preparing to dig even deeper into her journey than the documentary had gone. "You're becoming an empire," Keisha joked. "Documentary, speaking engagements, now a book. What's next, a podcast?" "Don't even joke about that," Helen said. "I have 5 toddlers. I barely have time to shower, let alone start a podcast." But the truth was, Helen's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined when she'd walked into that baby shower 10 months ago. She'd gone from trying to prove something to herself to accidentally becoming a voice for millions of women who'd faced similar struggles. As August approached and the documentary's air date neared, Helen felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She knew the release would bring another wave of attention, both positive and negative. She knew the Mueller family would likely escalate their attacks. She knew her life would become even more public. But she also knew she was ready. She'd survived everything life had thrown at her so far. She'd built a beautiful life from the rubble of her broken marriage. She'd created a family, her family, that was strong and whole and full of love. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else. With courage, honesty, and the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. On August 10th, 5 days before the documentary aired, Helen took the quintuplets to the park for what she called a moment of normal before the chaos resumed. They played on the swings, chased each other through the grass, and ate ice cream that melted faster than they could eat it. "Mama, are you happy?" Nora asked suddenly, sticky hands wrapped around Helen's arm. "I'm so happy, baby." "Why do you ask?" "Because you smile a lot. And Grandma says when people smile a lot, it means they're happy inside." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "Grandma's right. I am happy inside. Because I have you and your brothers and sisters. You 5 make me happier than I ever thought possible." "We're the best thing that ever happened to you," Nora announced with the confidence of a child who'd heard it many times. "You absolutely are," Helen agreed. "The very best thing." As she watched her children play, Helen thought about the journey that had brought her here. The diagnosis that had felt like a death sentence. The divorce that had shattered her world. The lonely nights of IVF treatments. The terrifying pregnancy. The overwhelming early days of quintuplet motherhood. Every painful step had led her here to this moment, watching her 5 miracles be exactly who they were meant to be. And she wouldn't change a single thing. August 15th, 2026, arrived with the kind of late summer heat that made Maryland feel tropical. Helen woke at 5:30 a.m., not because of the quintuplets, miraculously, they were all still sleeping, but because her anxiety wouldn't let her rest. Today was the day. In 14 hours, the documentary would air on national television, and her life would be exposed to millions of viewers. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 11 months ago, she'd received an invitation to a baby shower. Now she was about to premiere in a documentary that had already generated more buzz than she could have imagined. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Keisha. "Today's the day, babe. You ready to change the world?" Helen typed back, "I just want to survive it." "You're going to do more than survive. You're going to inspire millions. Now get up and feed those babies. They're going to be awake in 3, 2, 1. As if on cue, Helen heard Nora's voice from the bedroom down the hall. "Mama, I'm awake. Can we have pancakes?" Helen smiled despite her nerves. Some things never changed. The documentary was scheduled to air at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Helen had planned a viewing party at her house with her parents, Keisha and Jerome, a few close friends from work, and of course the quintuplets, though they'd likely be asleep by the time it started. The morning passed in a blur of normal activities. Breakfast, playing outside, a trip to the grocery store where Helen was recognized by 3 different people who wished her well. The attention still felt surreal, but Helen was learning to accept it with grace. At 2 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Helen Coleman speaking. This is Catherine Whitmore from the Washington Post. I'm calling because we'd like to do a feature story on you to coincide with tonight's documentary premiere. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon? Helen had done enough media by now to know that the Washington Post was legitimate and significant. She agreed to a phone interview at 4 p.m., after the quintuplets went down for their naps. The interview lasted 45 minutes. Catherine was thorough and respectful, asking about Helen's journey but also about the broader implications of her story. You've become something of a symbol for women's autonomy and reproductive rights, Catherine observed. Was that your intention when you went to the baby shower? No, Helen said honestly. I just wanted to prove to myself that I'd moved on. I had no idea it would become this public. But now that it has, how do you feel about being a symbol? Helen thought about it carefully. I'm honored, honestly. If my story helps women feel less alone in their struggles, if it gives them courage to pursue their dreams even when others say it's impossible, then I'm grateful. But I'm also just a person. Just a mom trying to raise her kids and do her job and live her life. I think that's important to remember. I'm not extraordinary. I'm ordinary. Which means anyone can do what I did. What would you say to women who are currently where you were 4 years ago? Facing infertility, maybe dealing with unsupportive partners or family members, feeling hopeless. I'd say your worth isn't determined by your fertility or anyone else's approval. I'd say there are paths forward even when you can't see them yet. And I'd say that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, the rejection, the diagnosis, the loss, is actually redirecting you toward something better. It doesn't feel like that in the moment. It feels like death. But looking back, I can see that my divorce saved my life. At 5:30 p.m., guests started arriving for the viewing party. Dorothy came early to help with food preparation. Robert followed with supplies from the grocery store. Keisha and Jerome arrived with wine and desserts. Ramona from work came with her husband. A few other nurses Helen had become close with showed up, eager to support their colleague. By 7 p.m., Helen's living room was packed with people who loved her. People who'd supported her through the hardest years of her life. The quintuplets, sensing the excitement, were running around in their pajamas, too wired to sleep despite their usual bedtime approaching. All right, babies, say goodnight to everyone, Helen announced at 7:30, beginning the Herculean task of getting 5 toddlers to bed while a party happened downstairs. But Mama, there's people here. Noah protested. I know, baby, but it's bedtime. You can see everyone tomorrow. It took 45 minutes and both Dorothy and Keisha helping, but finally, all 5 quintuplets were in their beds, if not quite asleep. Helen stood in the doorway of their room for a moment, watching them settle, and felt a wave of love so intense it almost knocked her over. Whatever happens tonight, she whispered. You 5 are my victory. Always. At 7:55 p.m., everyone gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, voices hushed with anticipation. Helen sat between her parents on the couch, Keisha on the floor in front of her, and felt surrounded by love. However this goes, Dorothy said, squeezing Helen's hand. We're so proud of you, baby. So proud, Robert echoed, his voice thick with emotion. At 8 p.m. exactly, the documentary began. The opening scene was footage of the baby shower. Helen arriving with the quintuplets, the shock on people's faces, the tension in the air. Then the screen faded to black, and Helen's voice narrated, 7 years ago I was told I was defective. This is the story of how I proved them wrong. For the next 90 minutes, Helen's living room was completely silent except for occasional sniffles and gasps. She watched herself on screen, reliving her journey through the filmmaker's eyes. The interviews with Dr. James Chen, her IVF doctor, who spoke eloquently about Helen's determination. Footage of her at work, being the competent nurse she'd always been. The confrontation with Stephen at the museum. Her speech at the fertility conference. But it was the quiet moments that hit hardest. Helen reading bedtime stories to her children, her face soft with love. Helen sitting alone on her porch, processing her emotions. Helen playing with the quintuplets at the park, laughing freely. The documentary didn't shy away from the difficult parts. It included Patricia's Facebook posts, the criticism Helen had faced, the legal threats. But it also included the women Helen had inspired. Interviews with women who'd been moved by her story, who'd found courage in her example. The film ended with Helen at home, the quintuplets playing around her, and her final words. "My life didn't turn out the way I planned. It turned out better. Because I learned that I don't need anyone's permission or approval to build the life I want. I just need courage. And love. And the understanding that I am enough exactly as I am." The credits rolled, and for a moment, no one in Helen's living room spoke. Then Keisha started clapping, and everyone joined in, applauding and crying and hugging. "That was beautiful," Ramona said, wiping her eyes. "Helen, you're going to change so many lives with this." Helen's phone, which she'd silenced for the viewing, suddenly lit up with notifications. Hundreds of them. Her social media was exploding. Text messages were pouring in from people she hadn't heard from in years. "It's already trending," Keisha announced, checking her phone. Hashtag Helen Coleman Strong is the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The documentary hashtag is #3. Over the next hour, as the party continued, Helen scrolled through reactions online. The response was overwhelming. "I just watched the Helen Coleman documentary and I'm sobbing. What a powerful story of resilience. As someone with PCOS who's been told I'll never have children, this documentary gave me hope I didn't know I needed." Helen Coleman is what strength looks like. Not revenge, not bitterness, just pure determination to build a beautiful life. That moment when Stephen saw her with the quintuplets. Iconic. But there were negative comments too. Some accused Helen of exploiting her children for fame. Others defended Patricia and Stephen, claiming Helen was vindictive. A few suggested the whole story was exaggerated or fake. "Don't read the negative ones," Dorothy advised, seeing Helen's expression. "You can't please everyone, honey. Focus on the people you're helping." At 10:30 p.m., after most guests had left, Helen was cleaning up the kitchen when her phone rang. "Brittany." "Helen, I just watched the documentary. Can I come over? I know it's late, but I really need to talk to someone who understands." 20 minutes later, Brittany was sitting at Helen's kitchen table, eyes red from crying, with 7-month-old Christopher asleep in a carrier. "I've left Stephen," Brittany said without preamble. "Officially. I filed for divorce last week, and I moved out 3 days ago. I'm staying with my mom." "How are you holding up?" "I'm terrified. And relieved. And sad. And angry. And about 50 other emotions all at once." Brittany wrapped her hands around the mug of tea Helen had made her. "But watching your documentary tonight, seeing what you went through and how you came out the other side, it gave me courage, Helen. It showed me that leaving doesn't mean failing. Sometimes leaving means saving yourself. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do," Helen said gently. "But you're doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it for Christopher and for yourself." Patricia is furious. She's been calling non-stop, saying I'm destroying the family, that I'm keeping her from her grandson. Stephen is. He's confused and hurt and blaming everyone but himself and his mother. Brittany looked up at Helen. "You tried to warn me. From the very beginning, you tried to tell me what they were like." "I did. But you needed to discover it yourself. If I'd pushed harder, you might have just pushed back and defended them." "You're right. I needed to see it with my own eyes. And once I did, I couldn't unsee it." Brittany glanced at Christopher, sleeping peacefully. "I don't want him growing up thinking that's what healthy relationships look like. I don't want him to become another Stephen, unable to stand up to his mother, unable to choose his wife over his family of origin." They talked for another hour, Helen sharing advice about divorce with children, about co-parenting with difficult people, about rebuilding your life. When Brittany finally left, she hugged Helen tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, for being kind when you had every reason not to be, for showing me what strength looks like, for being the example I needed. After Brittany left, Helen stood in her kitchen, processing the evening. The documentary had aired. Millions of people had watched her story. Brittany had found the courage to leave. And Helen felt peaceful, complete. The next morning, Helen woke to discover the documentary had been watched by 8.2 million viewers in its first airing. A massive number for a documentary. It was being shared across social media platforms, generating think pieces in major publications, and sparking conversations about fertility, divorce, and single motherhood everywhere. The Washington Post article about Helen published that morning with the headline, "Helen Coleman's story is about more than one woman's journey, it's about redefining worth." But the message that touched Helen most came in an email from a woman named Sarah in Oregon. "Dear Helen, I'm a 42-year-old woman with PCOS. I've been divorced for 6 years, and I'd given up on ever becoming a mother. Last night, I watched your documentary and cried for 2 hours straight. Then I called a fertility clinic this morning and scheduled a consultation. I don't know if IVF will work for me. I don't know if I'll be able to afford it or if my body will cooperate. But watching you, seeing your 5 beautiful children, hearing you talk about being told you were defective and refusing to accept that, it gave me permission to try, to hope, to believe that maybe I'm not too old, too broken, or too alone to pursue this dream. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for showing women like me that we have options, even when the world tells us we don't. Whatever happens with my fertility journey, I'm grateful to you for inspiring me to take the first step. With admiration and hope, Sarah." Helen read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why she'd shared her story. Not for fame or vindication or revenge, but for Sarah in Oregon and Christina in Ohio, and the 47 women who'd contacted Dr. Chen about IVF, and the countless others who needed to know they weren't alone. On August 20th, 5 days after the documentary aired, Helen received a certified letter. For a moment she tensed, expecting another legal threat. But this letter was from a different source entirely. The National Organization for Women, inviting Helen to receive their annual Courage in Adversity award at their gala in New York City in October. "They want to give me an award," Helen told Keisha over the phone, still stunned. "Of course they do. Helen, you've become a voice for women's rights, for reproductive autonomy, for standing up to toxic family systems. You deserve recognition." The award ceremony was scheduled for October 18, 2026. Helen would need to give an acceptance speech, attend a gala, and participate in press events. It was overwhelming and thrilling in equal measure. But first, she had a more immediate event to handle. The quintuplets' 3rd birthday party on September 23, 2026. Helen threw herself into party planning with the same determination she'd applied to everything else in her life. She rented out a local park pavilion, ordered a massive cake, invited friends and family, and prepared for controlled chaos. The day of the party was perfect. Sunny and 75 degrees, with a light breeze that kept it from being too hot. The quintuplets wore coordinating outfits, not matching, never matching, and ran wild with the other children in attendance. As Helen watched Nora leading a game of tag, Noah showing off his newfound climbing skills, Chloe dancing to the music, and Jasmine and Liam playing their usual twin telepathy games, she felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. "You did good, baby," Dorothy said, coming to stand beside her. "Look at these children. Happy, healthy, loved. You did this all on your own." "Not on my own," Helen corrected. "You and Dad have been here every step of the way. Keisha too. I couldn't have done this without my support system. But you're the foundation. You're the one who gets up at night when they're sick, who works full-time to provide for them, who makes every decision about their lives. You're their whole world, Helen. And you're doing a beautiful job." Midway through the party, Helen noticed a car pulling into the parking lot. A silver Mercedes that looked expensive and out of place among the minivans and SUVs. Her stomach dropped when she saw who got out. Stephen. Alone. He walked toward the party with hesitant steps, and Helen felt every protective instinct surge to life. This was her children's birthday party. Her space. her celebration. He had no right to be here. She met him at the edge of the pavilion, her body language clearly saying he wasn't welcome any closer. "What are you doing here, Stephen?" "I wanted to see them." "Your kids." "I wanted to see what?" He trailed off, looking past her at the quintuplets playing. "They're beautiful, Helen." "I know they are. Now leave." "I just need to say something first. Please." Stephen looked tired, older than his 36 years. "I watched the documentary. All of it. And I realized what I did to you. What my mother and I put you through. It was cruel, Helen. Inexcusable. And I'm sorry." Helen stared at him, searching his face for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive. But all she saw was genuine regret. "You're sorry," she repeated flatly. "I am. I'm so sorry. For not supporting you when you needed it most. For letting my mother control our marriage. For giving up on you instead of fighting for us. For making you feel like you were defective when the only thing defective was my inability to be the husband you deserved." Stephen's voice cracked. "You were right about everything. About my mother, about my weakness, about all of it. And I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too much of a coward to stand up for you." Helen felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. A letting go of the last bitter dregs of anger she'd been carrying. "I appreciate the apology, Stephen. I do. But it doesn't change anything. Those children," she gestured to the quintuplets, "they're mine. Not ours, not yours. Mine. You had a chance to be their father, to go through IVF with me, to build this family together. You chose to walk away. You don't get to come back now because it turned out I could have children after all. I know. I'm not asking to be part of their lives. I'm just asking you to know that I see what I lost. And I'm devastated by it." Stephen looked at her with genuine pain. "Brittany left me. Did she tell you?" "She did. She said I was just like I was with you. That I let my mother control everything, that I never stood up for her. And she was right. I'm doing the same thing all over again because I don't know how to do anything else." He laughed bitterly. "You thrived after leaving me, Helen. You built this incredible life. And I'm still exactly where I was 4 years ago, still trapped in my mother's expectations, still unable to be my own person. That's not my problem to fix, Stephen. I know. I know it's not. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About everything. And I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to see it sooner." Helen studied him for a long moment. This man had been her husband, her partner, the person she'd planned to build a life with. Now he was a stranger, someone from a different chapter of her life that was closed and finished. "I forgive you," she said finally. "Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry anger anymore. I've built something beautiful from the rubble of our marriage, and I'm grateful for where I am now. So yes, I forgive you. But that doesn't mean you're welcome in my life or my children's lives. We're done, Stephen. Completely done." "I understand." He nodded, turning to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you're an amazing mother. Those kids are lucky to have you." "I know," Helen said simply. "Now please leave and don't come back." She watched him walk back to his car and drive away, and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That was closure. Real closure. Not the performance at the baby shower, but this quiet moment of forgiveness and finality. Was that Stephen? Keisha appeared at her side, having witnessed the exchange from a distance. It was. He came to apologize. And I forgave him. Then I sent him away. Helen smiled. "I don't need his apology to be happy, Kuish. I'm already happy. But it was nice to hear him acknowledge what he did. It was nice to know that he sees what he lost. You're a better person than me. I'd have punched him." Helen laughed. "The thought crossed my mind. But I have 5 children watching me. I need to model grace, even when it's hard." The party continued, and Helen pushed Stephen's visit out of her mind. This day was about her children, about celebrating 3 years of their beautiful, chaotic existence. As the sun began to set and guests started leaving, Helen sat on a picnic blanket with the quintuplets, all of them exhausted but happy. "Mama, this was the best birthday ever," Nora announced, still clutching the balloon she'd been carrying all day. "I'm glad, baby. You all deserve the best of everything." "Are we going to have another birthday next year?" Noah asked, his logic endearingly 3-year-old. "Every year, buddy. You get a birthday every year. Forever. Forever." Helen looked at her 5 children, her miracles, her greatest achievements, her whole heart existing outside her body, and felt gratitude so profound it almost hurt. On October 18, 2026, Helen stood on a stage in New York City, accepting the Courage in Adversity Award in front of 700 people. She wore an elegant navy dress, her natural hair styled in beautiful twists, and felt more confident than she ever had before. "Thank you for this incredible honor," she said into the microphone, her voice steady and strong. "When I was told I had pros and would struggle to have children, I felt broken. When my husband divorced me because of it, I felt worthless. And when I decided to pursue IVF on my own, I felt terrified. But I did it anyway. Because sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the thing anyway." She talked about her journey, about the pain and the triumph, about the 5 children who'd come from her determination. "I'm not special," Helen said, looking out at the audience. "I'm not extraordinarily strong or brave. I'm just a woman who refused to let someone else's rejection define my worth. And that's something any of us can do. We can all choose to believe in ourselves even when the world says we're not enough. We can all choose to pursue our dreams even when the path is difficult. We can all choose courage over comfort." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. After the ceremony, at the reception, Helen was approached by dozens of women wanting to share their stories, to thank her, to tell her how she'd changed their lives. Each conversation was a reminder that her pain had purpose, that her struggle had meaning beyond just her own experience. One woman, a fertility specialist from California, told Helen that her clinic had seen a 40% increase in IVF inquiries since the documentary aired. "You've given women hope," the doctor said. "That's an extraordinary gift." As Helen flew home to Maryland the next day, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the broken woman who'd signed divorce papers in July 2021 to the confident woman accepting awards in October 2026, it had been 5 years and 3 months of transformation. But the real transformation wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the woman she'd become. Someone who knew her worth, who stood in her truth, who loved fiercely and lived authentically. On November 1, 2026, Helen received an email from her literary agent, Victoria. A major publisher wanted to offer her a 2-book deal for her memoir and a follow-up about single motherhood. The advance was enough that Helen could reduce her hours at the hospital, spend more time with the quintuplets, and focus on writing. "This is really happening," Helen told Keisha over video chat. "I'm going to write books. Plural. Of course you are. Your story is too important not to be told in every medium possible." "But what if I'm not a good writer? What if?" "Helen Coleman, I'm going to stop you right there. You've spent the last year telling everyone else they're enough, that they're capable, that they can do hard things. Time to take your own advice." Keisha was right. Helen signed the book deal in mid-November and began the process of writing her memoir. It was hard, emotional work, revisiting the painful parts of her journey, putting her most vulnerable moments into words. But it was also cathartic, a way of processing everything she'd been through. By December 2026, as the year drew to a close, Helen found herself in a quiet moment of reflection. The quintuplets were asleep, the house was clean, a miracle, and she sat on her back porch with a cup of tea, wrapped in a blanket against the winter cold. She thought about everything that had happened since that September morning when she'd received Stephen's baby shower invitation. The confrontation at the shower. The television interviews. The documentary. The speeches. The book deal. The women she'd inspired. The life she'd built. But most of all, she thought about the 5 sleeping children upstairs. Nora, who was already showing signs of being a natural leader. Chloe, the creative free spirit. Jasmine and Liam, the intuitive twins who communicated without words. Noah, the adventurous risk-taker who kept her on her toes. These were her victories. Not the awards or recognition, not the vindication of proving Stephen wrong, not the documentary views or book deals. Just 5 breathing, growing, loving humans who called her mama. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously and found a message from Brittany. "Hi Helen. I wanted you to be one of the first to know. My divorce was finalized today. Christopher and I are officially free from the Mahler family. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to choose yourself. I'm scared but excited about this new chapter. Wishing you and your beautiful quintuplets all the happiness in the world. Love, Brittany." Helen smiled, typing back, "Congratulations on your freedom. You and Christopher are going to be just fine. Maybe more than fine. Maybe extraordinary. Wishing you both all the love and joy you deserve." As Helen prepared for bed that night, checking on each sleeping child one last time, she realized something profound. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not in spite of the divorce, the struggles, the pain, but because of them. Every closed door had led her here. Every rejection had redirected her toward something better. Every moment of despair had been a setup for a moment of joy. She thought about the girl she'd been when she married Stephen. Eager to please, desperate for approval, tying her worth to someone else's validation. That girl was gone, transformed by fire into this woman. Strong, complete, unapologetically herself. And as Helen climbed into her own bed, exhausted but content, she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you. For every closed door. For every rejection. For every moment that broke me down so I could build myself back up better. Thank you for this life, exactly as it is." Because Helen Coleman's life hadn't turned out the way she'd planned. It had turned out better. Helen stood in the wings of a stage in Los Angeles, waiting to be introduced for a TED Talk. Her memoir, Defective, How I Became Whole, had been on the New York Times bestseller list for 43 weeks. Her second book, 5 Times the Love, Single Motherhood of Multiples, was scheduled for release in 3 months. The quintuplets were now 5 years old, starting kindergarten, and more themselves than ever. Nora was already reading at a 2nd grade level. Chloe had discovered a love of painting. Jasmine and Liam had started piano lessons. Noah was obsessed with dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up. Helen's life was full, busy, chaotic, and absolutely perfect. She'd heard through mutual friends that Stephen and Patricia's relationship had fractured after Brittany's divorce. Patricia had apparently blamed Stephen for losing both wives, and Stephen had finally, started setting boundaries with his mother. Too little, too late, Helen thought. But she wished him well. She harbored no ill will anymore, only gratitude that his rejection had led her to this life. "Please welcome to the stage," the announcer said. "Author, nurse, mother of quintuplets, and advocate for women's reproductive rights, Helen Coleman." Helen walked out to thunderous applause, her head high, her heart full. She stood at the red circle in the center of the stage and looked out at 2,000 faces waiting to hear her story. "My name is Helen Coleman," she began, "and I want to tell you about the best thing that never happened to me." And as she told her story one more time, to help one more woman, to inspire one more person, to prove one more time that closed doors are sometimes blessings, Helen knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Living proof that sometimes the life that falls apart is making room for the life that falls together. Sometimes rejection is the greatest gift you'll ever receive. And sometimes the woman who was told she was defective becomes the woman who shows the world what perfection really looks like. Authentic, messy, brave, and completely, beautifully whole. Helen Coleman's story reminds us that our worth isn't determined by others' inability to see it, that closed doors often protect us from rooms we were never meant to occupy, and that the life we build from rubble can be more beautiful than anything we originally planned. Her journey from broken wife to empowered mother of 5 is a testament to the strength we discover when we refuse to accept someone else's definition of our value. What would you do if you faced a situation like Helen's? Would you have the courage to pursue your dreams alone? Share your thoughts below.